Hey there and welcome back. If the day has worn you down to the quiet, if the doing of it is behind you and the lamp at your side is the only light left burning, then settle in, because the next few hours are yours and you have nowhere left to be. This is one of the slow ones, an evening for letting the space you are in grow large and dim and far away, and for slipping out of your own century into one that was grander on its surface and stranger underneath than almost anything we build now. It is for anyone who has ever stood in some grand old house, open to visitors on a wet afternoon, and felt, behind the gilded chambers and the polished tables, the presence of another house entirely, a hidden one, narrow and unlit and full of doors that go nowhere a guest would ever be allowed. I would like to take you into a house like that tonight, a new-built mansion of the year 1875, raised in the English countryside on a fortune made in cotton, and to walk you through both of its worlds at once, the dozen beautiful chambers the family lived in, and the secret machine of stairs and passages and cellars that made all that beauty possible, and was built, on purpose, never to be seen. You do not have to lift a finger to come with me. You have only to let your breath lengthen and let the walls of that dwelling rise around you, out of the dark as I speak them. And somewhere in the depth of it, behind a plain door covered in green cloth that the family will pass tonight without a single glance, a bell is about to ring in a cold stone passage, and a girl who has been awake since before the dawn will set down what she is holding and climb. Before we go up the steps and in at the great front door, let me say one or two unhurried things to you, the way you might exchange a quiet word with someone on a threshold. I always like to know where in the world you are listening from tonight, and what the hour has come to where you are, whether the dark is well down with you already, or only beginning to settle at the edges of the day. And if you would tell me in the comments, I do read them, and there is a strange and a real comfort in the knowing that so many of us, in so many different places, and so many different hours of the one night, are drawing in toward the same warmth at the same time. And if these long evenings spent inside houses and lives that are gone from the world are something you find you would like to come back to, you are welcome to subscribe, and another of them will make its way to you when it is ready, with nothing owed and no hurry in any of it. That is all I will ask of you. Only a quiet word at the door, and a place kept for you nearer the fire than a stranger could expect. Picture this. It is a cold, clear evening in the late autumn of the year 1875, and we are standing at the foot of a long carriage drive in the English shires, looking up at a mansion that did not exist 10 years ago. It is enormous, and it is new, and it means to be noticed. Built all of warm red brick and pale-dressed stone, with tall clustered chimneys and stepped gables and tall mullioned windows throwing squares of yellow light out across the gravel. It sits on its low rise above terraced gardens like something that has stood there for centuries, which is exactly the impression it was raised, at vast expense, to give. This is Hertsmere, and the family who built it are called Ashworth, and not one stone of it is older than the listener is, though everything about it, the worn-looking stone and the heraldic glass, and the long gallery hung with other people's ancestors bought at auction, has been arranged to suggest otherwise. The light is failing fast now, the last of it draining cold and green from the western sky behind the roofline, and lamps are being lit in window after window as we watch, the mansion waking into its evening. And if you let your eye travel up from the blazing ground floor rooms to the smaller windows under the eaves, you will see that those topmost panes stay dark, or show only the faint moving glow of a single candle, and in that difference, between the floors that are lit and the floor that is not, lies the whole story we have come here tonight to tell. Walk up the drive with me, then, while the gravel is still pale enough to see, and let the place declare itself to you as it was meant to, for a house like this one is an argument before it is a home, and every line of it has been drawn to make a case. The Ashworths did not inherit Hertsmere. They built it, and they built it to look as though they had not, and the whole vocabulary of the thing, the mossed and weathered stone dressings, the deliberately irregular roofline, the tower that serves no purpose but to throw a romantic shadow, the diamond-paned windows that cost a fortune to glaze and a second fortune to keep clean, is the architecture of borrowed antiquity, a brand-new fortune dressing itself in the manners of an old one. There is a name for the style, the revived medievalism, that the rich of this age have fallen in love with, all gables and gargoyles and oak and stained glass, a deliberate turning away from the smoke and the iron of the very mills that paid for it toward a dream of a settled feudal past in which the Ashworths' grandfathers were certainly not lords of anything. The drive is long on purpose, curving so that it is glimpsed and glimpsed again, each turn composing a better view, until the gravel sweep opens out before the entrance front and the building stands fully revealed, lit and waiting, and you understand that you have been walked, quite deliberately, through a piece of theatre whose single subject is the wealth and the standing of the people who live inside. The closer you come, the newer it looks, for all the artful weathering cannot quite hide that the mortar is barely set, and the young ivy has been coaxed up the walls on wires, and the gardens, for all their clipped formality, are gardens of this decade, planted by a small army of men to look established before their time. Everything here is saying the same thing, and it says it in stone and glass and gravel and yew, and the thing it says is that the family who commissioned it have arrived, and mean to stay, and would prefer that you did not ask too closely where they came from. Come up the broad, shallow steps, then, between the carved beasts that guard them, and in through the iron-studded door that a servant has opened from within before our hand could ever reach the bell, and stand a moment in the hall, and let the warmth and the light and the sheer scale of it settle over you. This is the entrance hall, and it is the first and the grandest of the public chambers, designed to do to every visitor exactly what the drive began, to impress, to overawe, to announce. It rises the full height of the building, a baronial space of carved oak and veined marble, with a staircase that divides and turns and climbs grandly into the shadows above, and a fireplace large enough to roast an ox, burning a fire that no one in the family will sit beside, for the hall is not a space to live in, but a space to arrive in. The light comes from gas now, the new soft hissing light in its etched glass globes, supplemented by the leaping flames of that useless fire, and it falls on suits of armour that never sheltered an Ashworth, on hunting trophies and ancestral-looking portraits, on a long oak table bearing a silver salver for the calling cards of the people who come to call. The eye is meant to travel upward here, to the carved beams and the heraldic shields in the high windows, and to feel small and impressed, and the visitor, taking it all in, is meant never to notice the one feature of the hall that matters most for our purposes tonight, which is a single modest door, set discreetly into the panelling beneath the rise of the main stair, an ordinary door of ordinary size, covered not in carved oak like everything else, but in plain green woolen cloth, studded round its edge with brass nails. It is easy to miss. It is meant to be missed, and it is the most important door in the house. That green door, and the hundreds like it that we will pass tonight, is the seam along which this whole mansion is divided, for Hertsmere, like every mansion of its size and its century, is in truth two houses built into one, and the green baize door is the border between them. On this side of it is the world we have just entered, the world of the family and their guests, of carved oak and gaslight and silver and silk, of chambers made for leisure and display, warm, beautiful, and serene. On the other side of it, and we will go through shortly, is the house that serves, a labyrinth of bare boards and whitewashed walls and stone stairs and cold passages, of kitchens and sculleries and cellars and attics, in which a small population of human beings works from before dawn until after midnight to produce and to sustain every comfort and every beauty on the family's side. The two worlds touch everywhere and are meant to meet nowhere. The whole architecture of the house, as we shall see, is bent toward keeping them apart, toward ensuring that the labour which produces the leisure is never witnessed by those who enjoy it, that the household may move through their beautiful rooms in the serene belief that warmth and food and light and cleanliness simply arrive, as if by magic, borne in on silent feet through doors that are not supposed to be looked at. The green baize of the door even had a purpose beyond disguise, for the cloth deadened sound, muffling the clatter and the voices of the working house, so that nothing of its noise should leak through into the calm of the chambers beyond. Push it open, and the temperature drops, and the smell changes, and the carpet gives way to scrubbed deal, and you have crossed in a single step from one century's idea of paradise into the engine room that made it run. But we will not cross yet. First, let us meet the family whose dream this mansion is, and understand the fortune that raised it. The man who built all this is called Edmund Ashworth, and to understand the man you must understand him, for Hertsmere is his self-portrait in brick and stone. He is somewhere in his middle 50s, a big deliberate man with a heavy gold watch chain across a broad waistcoat, and he was not born to any of this. His grandfather was a weaver who put a few looms in a shed. His father turned that shed into a mill, and then into 3 mills, riding the roaring boom of cotton that made the north of England the workshop of the world. And Edmund, inheriting the business as a young man, multiplied it again, until the family name stood over factory gates and warehouse doors across half of Lancashire, and the money came in faster than 3 generations of careful weavers could ever have dreamed of spending it. And that, precisely, is the difficulty that built this house, for in the England of this century money alone does not make a gentleman, and the Ashworths, for all their wealth, carry the faint indelible mark of the trade that produced it. So Edmund has done what such men do. He has bought land, a vast deal of land, for land is the oldest currency of standing. He has built a mansion that apes the houses of the ancient gentry. He has filled it with bought ancestors and borrowed heraldry. He has taken his sons out of the counting house and sent them to the schools and the university, where the sons of the old families go to acquire the accent and the manners that money cannot directly purchase, and he is engaged, through this whole vast and costly performance, in the patient business of laundering a fortune into a lineage, of turning, over 2 or 3 generations, cotton into county, trade into title, the new into the seemingly old. His wife, Mrs. Ashworth Margaret, is the mistress of the dwelling, and the running of this immense and complicated establishment is her domain, as completely as the mills are her husband's. She came from a family a shade more genteel than his, a fact that mattered greatly at their marriage and matters still, and she has made herself the keeper of the family's social ascent, the one who knows which families must be cultivated and which may be dropped, who must be invited to dinner and in what order they must go in, who studies the etiquette of a world she is climbing into with the diligence of a scholar, because a single misstep can undo years of careful advance. She does not cook, or clean, or light a fire, or carry a thing heavier than a fan, for the entire purpose of a lady in her position is to be visibly excused from labour, to be the ornament that demonstrates the family's wealth precisely by doing nothing useful with her hands. Her work, and it is real work, is the management of appearances and the management of the household, conducted through the housekeeper and the butler who answer to her, and the directing of that hidden army whose existence makes her own elegant idleness possible. There are children too, 3 of them, kept for now in the upper world of the nursery and the schoolroom, seen by their parents for a scrubbed and tidy hour in the evening, and otherwise raised almost entirely by servants, growing up in a wing of their own home that their mother visits as a guest. They are the future of the project, the generation that is meant to be born to all this, rather than to have clawed its way up to it, the grandchildren of the weaver who will, if everything goes to plan, be indistinguishable from the genuine article. That is the family, and every space we are about to walk through on both sides of the green door exists to serve that single overarching ambition, the transformation of a cotton fortune into the appearance of an ancient and effortless gentility. Yin. Begin with the drawing room, for it is the heart of the family's public world and the particular kingdom of its mistress, the chamber into which the most honoured guests are shown, and in which the family displays itself at its most refined. Step into the chamber from the hall, and the whole register of the interior changes from the dark baronial grandeur of oak and stone to something lighter, softer, and unmistakably feminine. For the drawing-room is by long convention the lady's room, decorated to her taste and governed by her presence. The walls are hung with silk, a pale dove grey figured with a faint pattern, and the windows are smothered in curtains of a richer rose, swagged and fringed and tasselled, and drawn back over inner curtains of lace, so that the daylight, when there is any, enters filtered and flattering. The furniture is delicate, gilt, upholstered in damask, arranged in conversational islands across a carpet woven with garlands, and every flat surface in the chamber, and there are many, is crowded with the small precious objects that proclaim the family's wealth and cultivation, the porcelain figures, and the silver-framed photographs, the enamelled boxes, and the cut-glass scent bottles, the albums and the fans, and the little watercolours in their gilt frames. There is a grand piano draped with a shawl and topped with yet more photographs, for the daughters of such a house must be accomplished, and music is among the accomplishments they are made to display. Nothing in the room is for hard use. The chairs are too fragile to lounge in, the tables too crowded to set anything down upon, the whole space arranged less for living than for being seen to live correctly, a stage set for the rituals of calling and tea and polite conversation by which the family conducts its campaign for acceptance. And every object in it, the porcelain that must be dusted without breaking, the silk that must never be soiled, the lace that must be washed and starched by hand, the carpet that must be brushed on hands and knees, represents hours of unseen labour, by people who are themselves never permitted to sit in the spaces they keep so beautiful, and who must, by the strictest rule of the household, vanish entirely before the Ashworths comes down. If the drawing-room is the ladies', the rooms along the other side of the hall are the gentlemen's, a suite of darker, heavier, more comfortable spaces given over to the masculine life of the house, and they are worth lingering in, for they tell you as much about the family's ambitions as the drawing-room does. First the library, lined floor to ceiling with books in tooled leather bindings, many of them bought by the yard to fill the shelves and never opened. For a gentleman's house must have a library whether or not a gentleman reads, and it is furnished with deep leather armchairs, and a broad partner's desk, and a globe, and the smell of dust and morocco and old paper. Beyond it lies the billiard room, the most purely masculine room of all, with its broad slate-bedded table under a low-shaded lamp that pulls the light down onto the green cloth and leaves the rest of the apartment in shadow, the walls hung with sporting prints and the heads of stags, the air kept deliberately apart from the rest of the household because of what happens here, which is smoking. For this is the age in which the cigar has conquered the gentleman, and a separate room is given over to it, and a special short velvet jacket and embroidered cap are kept to be put on for the purpose, so that the smell of tobacco shall not cling to the clothes worn in the drawing-room and offend the ladies. The gentlemen withdraw here after dinner when the ladies have left the table, to smoke and to drink and to talk the franker talk of men among men, of money and politics and horses and the things not said in front of women, and the chamber is built to contain them and their smoke and their voices, set as far as the plan allows from the feminine apartments, a male preserve within the larger female-managed household. These too, like the drawing-room, are kept by invisible hands, the ash emptied and the leather polished and the endless books dusted by housemaids, who must do it all in the early hours before the family is about, so that the gentleman who settles into his armchair with the morning newspaper need never once consider how it came to be clean, or who carried up the coal that warms it, or where, in the hidden house all around him, that person is at this moment toiling. The dining room is the theatre of the family's entire social ambition, the room where the campaign for standing is fought most directly, for the giving and the taking of dinners is the very currency of acceptance in this society, and a deal of thought and a vast amount of labour go into making the Ashworth's table a thing that the county will consent to sit at. It is a long, dark, dignified chamber, panelled and serious, dominated by a long mahogany table that can be extended with leaves to seat 20, and tonight it is laid for a dinner party, and the laying of it is itself a kind of art. The cloth is of damask, ironed to a mirror smoothness, with not a crease permitted. The places are set with a precision that would do credit to a parade ground, each place faced with a daunting regiment of silver, forks and knives and spoons in their correct order for the many courses to come, glasses of 3 or 4 sizes for the several wines, a folded napkin, a menu card written in French. Down the centre of the board runs a long display of silver and glass and flowers and fruit, the epen and the candelabra and the comports, the family's best plate carried up from the strong room and set out to be admired. For the silver on a dinner board is a direct and a legible statement of wealth, and it is meant to be read. When the guests are seated, the meal will proceed through its many courses with a slow ceremonial rhythm. The soup and the fish and the entrees and the roasts and the game and the sweets and the savoury, each carried in and presented and removed by footmen moving in trained silence around the table, the whole performance choreographed to seem effortless and abundant and serene. And every mouthful of it, every gleaming fork and spotless glass and silent dish set down at the correct moment from the correct side, is the visible tip of an enormous submerged labour, of a kitchen in uproar 2 floors below, of a butler counting his silver, of a chain of human beings stretching down into the hidden house, and the entire purpose of the performance is to make all of that labour disappear, to present the abundance as if it had simply bloomed there on the table of its own accord. And now at last, let us do the thing the family never does, and cross over. Find that plain green door beneath the stairs again, and push it open, and step through, and feel the house change around you in an instant. The first thing is the cold, for the heat and the deep carpets and the roaring fires are all for the family's side. And here, the moment the door swings to behind you, the air is sharp and the warmth is gone. Underfoot, the soft carpet has given way to bare scrubbed boards or plain stone flags. The silk and the oak panelling have become whitewashed walls, or walls washed a serviceable dull green or buff to the height of a person's shoulder and whitewashed above, easy to clean and cheap to maintain. The soft gas light is gone too, replaced by the harder economy of oil lamps at the turnings and tallow candles carried in the hand, so that the passages run away into a dimness the family's apartments never know. And the silence is gone most of all, for on this side of the door the establishment is never silent, and through the walls and up the stairwells comes the sound of the working house, the clatter of the kitchen, the tramp of feet on stone, the jangle of bells, voices calling, water running, the whole busy machinery of a working household at its labour. This is the other Heartsmere, the one that does not appear in any photograph, the one the architect drew with as much care as the grand rooms, but never meant to be seen, and it is built upon a single iron principle that governs every line of its plan, a principle the writers on house building of this age stated quite openly, that the family and the servants should form two separate worlds under one roof, and that the architecture must be arranged so that the one need never see, hear, smell, or be aware of the other, except at the precise and chosen moments when a servant is summoned to appear. We are now inside the machine that makes that separation real. The first marvel of the hidden world is the way it moves its people about, for a large establishment may keep 24 servants, and those servants must be able to reach every corner of the family's world to clean it and warm it and serve it, and yet they must do so without ever being met coming or going. The solution, worked into the very bones of the plan, is a second and entirely separate system of circulation, a parallel set of stairs and passages reserved for the staff, threaded through the thickness of the structure so cleverly that the two can occupy the same building and almost never collide. Where the family climbs the grand carved staircase rising grandly out of the hall, the staff climb a back stair narrow and steep and made of plain deal or stone, tucked away behind a discreet door and winding up through all the floors in a tight, unlovely spiral, unheated, unlit but for a window on each landing, worn in the centre of each tread by the passage of countless feet. A housemaid carrying a heavy can of hot water up to a bedroom does not pass through the family's part of the house at all. She goes up the back stair, along a service corridor, and emerges through a concealed door directly into the chamber she must serve, having travelled the whole height of the stair unseen. The passages on the family's floors are doubled, a grand corridor for the family, and, running alongside it or behind it, a plainer service passage from which the bedrooms can be reached from the rear. Even the windows of the back stair are often set with obscured or high-set glass, so that a servant climbing them cannot be glimpsed from the gardens where the family walks. The whole hidden geometry of the place is bent to a single end, the perfect and continuous invisibility of the people who keep it running, and a domestic learns very early, as the first lesson of the work, the cardinal rule that follows from it, which is that should you ever, by some failure of the system, find yourself about to meet a member of the household in a passage, you must stop, turn your face to the wall, and make yourself as nearly as possible not there. How then is a servant summoned out of this hidden world at the moment one is wanted, called up from the depths of the house to a particular chamber without anyone going to fetch them? The answer hangs on the wall of a passage near the kitchen, and it is the nervous system of the whole household, a board or row of bells, one for every principal space in the house, each connected by a long run of wire, threaded through the walls and under the floors to a bell pull or a button in the room it serves. When the master in his library wants his man, he pulls the embroidered sash by the fireplace, and far below, in the servants' passage, a particular bell leaps and jangles on its coiled spring, and beneath it a small label or a swinging pendulum shows which apartment has called, and a footman reads it and goes. The system is a quiet revolution in the running of a household, for it means the family need keep no servant standing about in their chambers awaiting orders, as in older times. The servants may all be kept below, out of sight, in their own world, and conjured up one at a time, precisely as needed, by the pull of a cord. The wires run everywhere, an invisible web laid through the entire structure during its building, every grand room secretly tethered to that jangling board in the passage below, and the bells have their own language that the staff learn to read, the urgent repeated summons, the single imperious ring, the particular bell that means the mistress wants her maid that no one dares keep waiting. To stand by that board in the evening and watch the bells dance, one after another, and sometimes three at once, is to see the lower house spring into motion at the unspoken will of the world above, family pulling its cords in their warm, bright rooms, never seeing the bells leap or hearing the feet that answer, served as if by an invisible hand whose true name is a tired girl on a stone floor 2 stories down. Follow the busiest of those wires down to its source, and you come to the kitchen, the roaring heart of the hidden house, the single most important chamber on the servant's side, and the place from which the whole edifice of the family's comfort is, quite literally, fed. It is a tall vaulted room, often built with a high ceiling and high windows to let out the heat and the steam, and heat and steam there are in plenty, for the kitchen is dominated by the range, a vast black cast-iron engine of cookery, built into what was once the chimney breast, its fires burning from before dawn until late at night, its ovens and hot plates and boilers radiating a fierce warmth that makes the kitchen the hottest space in the entire establishment, and, in high summer, a place of real misery to labour in. Ranged about the walls and hanging from the beams is the battery of a serious kitchen, the gleaming ranks of copper pans scoured to a shine, the moulds and the colanders and the fish kettles, the broad scrubbed deal table in the centre on which the work is done, the dressers loaded with the everyday china. And over all of it presides the cook, a woman of real power in the hidden hierarchy, addressed as Mrs. whether married or not as a mark of her rank, the absolute monarch of her kitchen, who plans and executes the daily marvel of feeding the family and their guests and the servants too, sending up to the dining room the elaborate many-course dinners that the family takes as its due. The toil is relentless and skilled and physically punishing, conducted in heat and haste against the merciless clock of mealtimes, the cook and her kitchen maids labouring through the day in a choreography of chopping and stirring and roasting and sousing, and at the high moments when a dinner party must go up, the kitchen becomes a place of controlled frenzy, of shouted orders and flying hands and dishes finished at the last possible second to be rushed upstairs still hot. And yet of all this heat and skill and uproar, not the faintest echo is meant to reach the serene candlelit table 2 floors above, where the food simply appears, course after course, as though it cost nothing and no one to make. Off the kitchen, through a doorway, lies its poorer and harder relation, the scullery, and if the kitchen is a place of skill and heat and a kind of fierce dignity, the scullery is the place of pure drudgery, the lowest and most thankless post in the whole establishment, ruled by no one and worked by the youngest and least of all the staff, the scullery maid. It is a cold, wet, stone-floored room, given over to water and to dirt, and its single purpose is washing, the endless, ceaseless washing up of a large household that dirties hundreds of vessels a day. Here stand the deep shallow sinks of stone or lead, and beside them the mountains of the day's work, the pots and pans the cook has finished with, crusted and greasy and burnt, the plates and dishes coming down in relays from the dining room, the glasses, the cutlery, all of it to be scoured and scrubbed and rinsed in water that must itself be carried and heated, with no soap as we know it but soda that cracks the hands, and sand and ashes for the burnt pots, by a girl who may be no more than 13 or 14 years old. The scullery maid is the first servant awake in the morning, often before 5, and very nearly the last to finish at night, and her day is a long, unbroken round of the heaviest and dirtiest tasks the household can find, not only the washing up, but the scrubbing of the kitchen floors, the black leading of the lowest grates, the carrying of water and coal, the rough preparation of vegetables, the tasks that no one else will touch. She is at the very bottom of a hierarchy that is felt as keenly below stairs as any rank above them, looked down upon even by the housemaids, and she is paid almost nothing, and she does it, very often, in the hope that she may one day rise to be a kitchen maid and then, if she is able and fortunate, a cook with a kingdom of her own. For now she is the foundation on which the gleaming dinner upstairs is built, the unseen hands that make the silver shine and the porcelain spotless, and while the family sits at its sparkling table, she stands at her stone sink in the cold, her own hands raw and her apron soaked, washing and washing and washing again. Beyond the kitchen and its scullery lies a complete chill quarter of the service floor given over to the keeping of food, for an establishment far from the shops must store and preserve provisions on a scale that is itself a kind of warehouse, and these spaces are deliberately built on the chill north side, with thick walls and stone shelves and small shaded windows, to keep their contents from spoiling in an age before there is any other way to do it. There is the dry larder, lined with slate and marble slabs, icy to the touch, where the butter and the milk and the cooked meats and the made dishes are kept. There is the game larder, a place that would startle a modern eye, hung about with the bodies of birds and beasts in their feathers and fur, the pheasants and the hares and the haunches of venison, left to hang and ripen for days or weeks as the taste of the age demands. A dim, unheated apartment heavy with the particular smell of it. There is the dairy, scrubbed and chill, and almost a place of ritual cleanliness, where the milk is set in wide, shallow pans for the cream to rise and the butter is made and the cheeses are kept. And there is the matter of ice, for the family expects ices and chilled wines and cold sweets even in summer, and somewhere on the estate, sunk deep into the ground and packed each winter from the frozen lake, is the ice house, a domed pit that keeps its harvest of ice through the warm months to be carried up to the kitchen as wanted. All of this chill quarter is the housekeeper's responsibility, the storing and the checking and the guarding against waste and theft, and it represents the solution of a problem the Ashworths never thinks about, the problem of how a houseful of people far from any town shall eat, day after day, with abundance and variety, off the produce of the estate and the carefully hoarded stores, so that the dinner that appears upstairs seems to draw on an inexhaustible plenty, when in truth it draws on the patient, calculated, unceasing labour of provisioning that fills these chill and crowded rooms. The most jealously guarded room in the whole hidden residence is the butler's pantry, and at its heart, behind a locked door of its own, the plate room or strong room. For here is kept the family's silver, and the silver is wealth in its most concentrated and portable and stealable form, and its keeping is the butler's most solemn charge. The butler is the head of the male staff, and the most senior domestic of all, a figure of grave dignity, who governs the dining room and the cellar, and the male servants beneath him, and his pantry, set close to the dining room so that the silver has but a short journey, is his office and his domain, and very often his bedroom too, for he sleeps beside the plate to guard it. Within it the everyday silver is washed by the butler's own hands, or under his close eye, in a lead-lined sink kept apart from all the rougher washing. For silver must never be scoured like a kitchen pot, and it is dried and polished and counted, always counted, and laid away in baize-lined drawers and cases, each piece in its fitted place. The count checked against a list, for a full service of plate runs to many hundreds of pieces, and the loss of one is a serious matter. And the best of it, the grand display silver brought out only for company, the epergnus and the candelabra and the largest salvers, lives behind the iron door of the strong room, a fireproof and thief-proof vault built into the thickness of the house, opened only by the butler with the key he keeps on his person night and day. To stand in the plate room is to stand inside the family's accumulated wealth made solid and shining, a treasury of worked metal that says, as plainly as the house itself, how much money the Ashworths have, and how much they wish it to be seen, brought up and set glittering on the table when the county comes to dine, and locked away again the moment the guests have gone, guarded through every night by a man who has given his life to the keeping of other people's silver and will retire, if he is fortunate, on a pension and a character and the memory of plate that was never his. If the butler keeps the silver, the housekeeper holds very nearly everything else, and her chamber is the administrative centre of the hidden house, the female counterpart to the butler's pantry, and the seat of a quiet and considerable power. The housekeeper is the most senior woman among the servants, addressed as Mrs. as the cook is, and she answers directly to the mistress and to no one else, ruling over all the female staff but the lady's maid and the nurse. It is a comfortable one by the standards below stairs, almost a parlour, for her rank entitles her to it, and there she works at her accounts and her records, and above all, her keys. The heavy ring or basket of keys that is the very emblem of her office, for the housekeeper holds the keys to all the locked stores of the house, and nothing comes out of them without passing through her hands. Adjoining her room is the still room, her particular domain, a clean, dry, fragrant place that is part kitchen and part pharmacy and part storehouse, where the finer things are made and kept, that are beneath the cook's notice and above the reach of the lower domestics, the preserves and the jams, the cordials and the homemade wines, the cakes and the biscuits, that the tea and the coffee, and the sugar kept under lock, because they are dear, the candles and the soap. Then there is the linen, a responsibility so large it is almost a profession in itself, for a large house holds linen by the hundredweight, the sheets and the pillowcases, and the tablecloths and the napkins and the towels and the dusters, all of it marked and numbered and listed, washed and dried and ironed and mended and counted and stored in the linen room on its slatted shelves with sprigs of lavender between the folds, and all of it the housekeeper's charge. She knows the contents of every cupboard in her care. She engages and dismisses the housemaids and oversees their work and their conduct. She is, in her sphere, as much a manager as her master is in his mills, running a complex operation of stores and staff and standards, and she does it invisibly, so that the mistress upstairs may believe, as she is meant to believe, that the home simply keeps itself clean and stocked and supplied by some natural law, requiring of her nothing but the giving of the daily orders to the capable woman who makes it all in truth come true. All these hidden people, the butler and the housekeeper and the cook and the footman and the housemaids and the kitchen maids and the scullery maid, sit down together twice a day in the servants' hall, and that space is worth your attention, for it is the social heart of the lower world, and the place where its own elaborate order is most visible. The servants' hall is a large plain space, furnished with a long deal table and benches and chairs, where the staff take their meals and pass what little leisure the day allows, and to a stranger it might look like a single body of people, the staff lumped together as one. It is nothing of the kind. Below stairs is as finely and as fiercely graded as the society above it, perhaps more so, and nowhere is the gradation plainer than at the table in the servants' hall. There is an order of precedence as strict as anything in the dining room above, the upper servants and the lower servants divided by a gulf that is felt in every detail. The butler sits at the head of the table and the housekeeper at the foot, and the upper servants, the lady's maid, the valet, the cook, take the places nearest them, and the lower attendants range away down toward the middle and the end in their rank, the footmen, the housemaids, the kitchen maids, the hall boy, the scullery maid at the very last. In many houses the upper servants do not even eat the whole meal in the hall at all, but rise after the meat and withdraw, in a solemn procession that the lower servants find quietly comic, to take their pudding and their tea in the privacy of the housekeeper's room, a place so exclusive it is known among the staff as the pug's parlour. The forms are observed with a seriousness that mirrors, and sometimes mocks the forms of the world upstairs, for the people who spend their lives enforcing the family's precedents have absorbed its lessons thoroughly and apply them with full conviction to themselves. And so the vast machine of service is not one thing but a society entire, with its own ranks and rivalries and snobberies and ambitions, its own ladder to be climbed, its own ways of marking who is above whom, lived out below the floors of a family who imagine, when they think of it at all, that they keep simply so many servants, undifferentiated, interchangeable, and beneath notice. Return now to the family's side of the green door for a moment, and look more closely at the walls, for the principle of concealment that shapes the back stairs and the service passages reaches even here into the finished and beautiful apartments, in the form of the jib door, the concealed door, one of the quiet marvels of the great house interior. A jib door is a door made to disappear, fitted flush into the wall and finished over its whole surface to match its surroundings exactly, papered with the same paper, panelled with the same panelling, hung with the same pictures, its joints concealed and its handle removed or hidden, so that to the eye there is no door there at all, only an unbroken wall. Through such doors the servants come and go, slipping into a chamber to mend the fire or carry away a tray and vanishing again through what appears to be solid wall, and the family, accustomed to it, ceases to see the door at all, so that the illusion of magical, sourceless service is preserved, even at the very point where the two worlds touch. In the corner of a grand bedroom, a section of the panelling is in truth the door to the back stairs. Behind a bookcase in the study, which swings on a hinge, lies the service passage. The line of the wallpaper runs unbroken across a door that the housemaid will open at 6:30 in the morning, coming in unheard to lay the fire while the family sleeps. These hidden doors are everywhere once you know to look, and they are the most perfect expression of the whole idea on which the mansion is built, the idea that the labour must be present everywhere and visible nowhere, that the staff must be able to reach into the heart of every apartment and yet leave no trace of their coming, passing in and out through seams in the very walls, so that the family may live their whole lives in rooms that are tended as if by spirits, never once obliged to acknowledge the plain green-edged truth that someone quite close by is always working. The hidden house moves more than people through its secret arteries. It moves things, and chief among the contrivances for doing so is the dumb waiter, the small service lift that carries food and dishes silently between the floors. The kitchen, for all the reasons of heat and smell and noise, is very often placed in the basement, 2 full stories below the dining room, and the problem of getting a hot dinner up that distance, course after course, without an army of footmen pounding up and down the back stairs, is solved by a shaft sunk through the body of the house, with a small platform that runs up and down it on ropes and pulleys, loaded below and hauled up to a hatch beside the dining room, where a footman receives the dishes and bears them in. It is a clever and a homely piece of machinery, the dumb waiter, so called because it does the lifting and carrying of a servant without the tiresome presence of one, and the house is threaded with such devices, the speaking tubes through which an order can be called down from an upper floor to the kitchen, the hatches let into the walls at the turn of the service stair, through which trays may be passed, the chutes and the hoists by which coal and other heavy goods are moved without being carried through the family's chambers. Everywhere the same intelligence is at work, the intelligence of separation and concealment, finding mechanical means to spare the family the sight of the labour that serves them, so that a dish travels from the roaring basement kitchen to the silent candlelit table by a route that crosses the family's world only in the last few feet, borne the final short distance by a footman who has appeared, as if from nowhere, through a door that does not look like a door, carrying food that seems to have come from nowhere at all. The shaft runs up through the heart of the house, dark and greasy and busy, the ropes creaking, the platform rising and falling all through the long ceremony of dinner, an invisible engine pumping the family's nourishment up out of the depths, and not one of the diners gives it, or the people working it below, a single thought. Consider, while the family takes its ease in warm, bright rooms, the matter of the warmth and the light themselves, for these did not happen on their own, and the warming of a large house is among the heaviest of all the hidden work. There is no central heating worth the name in such a place. The house is warmed, hearth, by open coal fires, and there may be 30 or 40 of them burning on a winter's day, and every one of those fires must be laid, lit, fed, and cleared by hand, and the coal to feed them must be carried, in heavy scuttles, up from the cellars below to every grate in the building. This is the housemaid's chief labour, and it begins in the dark. Long before the household stirs, while the windows are still black, the housemaids are up and at the cold grates of the chambers downstairs, raking out yesterday's ashes, black leading the iron until it shines, laying the new fire of paper and wood and coal, and lighting it, so that by the time the family comes down, the chambers shall be warm, and the fires burning brightly, as if they had never gone out. All day the fires must be tended and fed, and the coal carried scuttle after heavy scuttle, the dust of it blacking the hands and the apron, up from the coal cellar where the year's fuel is stored in its tons, delivered down a chute from the yard, so that even the coalman need never cross the family's path. A large dwelling may burn many tons of coal in a year, and every pound of it is moved by human muscle, and the warmth that the family feels as a simple natural comfort, the cheerful fire in the grate, is in truth the visible end of a long chain of cold and dirty toil reaching down into the cellars and back into the dark hours before the dawn, performed by girls who will themselves sleep that night in cells with no fire at all. And the light and the water tell the same story of hidden systems and buried labour, for Hertsmere is a modern mansion built to enjoy the new conveniences of its age, and those conveniences come with their own concealed machinery. The house is lit by gas, piped from its own gasworks in a far corner of the estate, run through a web of pipes buried in the walls to the etched glass globes that hiss and glow in the family spaces, a clean, bright modern light that the family takes for granted, and that requires out of sight a man to tend the gasworks and a constant vigilance against the leaks and the smells and the dangers of it. The water is a greater marvel still, and a greater burden, for the house boasts that newest of luxuries, a bathroom, with a vast encased tub and the promise of hot water brought to it, and water closets on the bedroom floors, and all of this depends on an elaborate hidden system of cisterns in the roof, filled by a pump that must be worked, and pipes that run down through the walls, and boilers that must be stoked, and on the older drudgery that underlies the new convenience. For in much of the building water still arrives the ancient way, carried up the back stairs in heavy cans by housemaids, hot water for the morning wash and the evening bath, fetched by hand from the kitchen to the bedrooms, can after can, flight after flight. The family turns a tap, or steps into a drawn bath, and experiences the seamless comfort of the modern age, and behind the wall and below the floor and up the back stair runs the whole concealed apparatus that delivers it, half of it ingenious new plumbing, and half of it the oldest plumbing of all, the strong back and the climbing legs of a servant carrying water, and the two together, the buried pipe and the toiling girl, are what it truly means, in this house, to turn a tap. To understand the hidden establishment, you must understand its day, for the labour we have been touring space by space is not scattered at random, but organised into a long and punishing routine that begins in darkness and ends in darkness, a daily campaign waged against dirt and cold and disorder by people working to a timetable as fixed as the tides. It starts before 5 in the morning, when the lowest of the maids rise in their cold attic cells, dress in the dark, and creep down the back stairs into the sleeping house to begin the hard work of making it ready before the family wakes. While the family sleeps on in warmth, The hidden world is already in busy motion, the kitchen fire lit and the range roaring, the grates downstairs raked and black-leaded and set burning, the halls and the chambers swept and dusted, the steps scrubbed, the boots cleaned, the brass polished, the breakfast prepared, the whole apparatus of the day assembled and set in motion by hands that must finish and withdraw before the first of them appears. The Ashworths comes down to a home mysteriously warm and clean and breakfasted, the fires lit, the rooms aired, the table laid, with no more notion how it came to be so than they have of how the sun came up. And from that point the servants' day runs on without real rest, through the making of beds and the emptying of slops and the endless cleaning, the preparing and serving and clearing of the several meals, the answering of the bells, the carrying of coal and water, the work shaped always around the family's movements, intensifying for luncheon, and again, enormously, for the grand evening performance of dinner, and continuing long after the family has gone up to bed, in the washing up, and the laying of fires for the morning, and the final securing of the house, so that the maid who rose at 5 may not lie down again until near midnight to snatch the few hours of sleep before she must rise and do it all again. 18 hours of labour, day upon day, with a half-day off in the week if she is lucky and a Sunday morning for church, is the shape of a life in service, and it is the engine that turns, unseen and unceasing, where every other domestic is hidden. The footman appears in the dining-room and the hall and behind the carriage in livery, and his livery is a costume of display, a coat of the family's chosen colour, trimmed with braid and bright buttons, stamped with the family crest, knee breeches and stockings, and in the grandest houses, hair powdered white in the old fashion, long after powder has vanished from every other head in England. The footman is a part of the show in the same way the silver is a visible token of wealth, and he is hired accordingly, for a grand establishment wants its footman tall and well made, and matched in height like a pair of carriage horses, and a tall footman commands higher wages than a short one for no reason, but his looks, his height quite literally a qualification for the post. His duties are the visible services, waiting at table, opening the door, carrying messages and packages, attending the carriage, walking behind the family on their errands, and they are real enough, but a part of his value is simply to be there, large and handsome and impressively turned out, a living ornament demonstrating that the family can afford to keep big men in fine clothes to do work a smaller and plainer person could do as well. There is something telling in it that the one servant the family chooses to make visible is the one chosen for his appearance, kept like a fine object for show, and the footman knows it, and lives a curious life half in each world, splendid in the dining-room and cramped in his small, cold quarters below, an ornament by day and a tired young man by night, the most visible and in some ways the most purely decorative of all the family's many possessions. Of all the heavy labours of the hidden house, the heaviest of all may be the laundry, and it is so heavy and so hot and wet and disagreeable that it is very often banished from the house altogether, given its own separate building across a yard, so that its steam and its smell and its toil shall not trouble even the rest of the servants. For a great household generates a mountain of dirty linen, the sheets and the shirts and the tablecloths and the petticoats and the towels by the 100, and all of it must be washed by hand in an age that has no machine to help, and the washing of it is a science and an ordeal combined. The laundry maids, a breed apart even below stairs, begin by sorting and soaking, and then comes the washing proper, the linen pounded and rubbed and scrubbed in deep wooden tubs of hot water, all dripping from one tub to the next, boiled in the copper to whiten it, rinsed again and again, the work conducted in a perpetual fog of steam that runs down the walls and soaks the women to the skin. Whites must be blued to make them whiter, a touch of blue dye in the rinse to fool the eye. Then the wringing, by main force, or through the rollers of the mangle, that heavy iron-framed machine turned by hand that squeezes the water from the linen and can take a careless finger with it, then the drying, on lines in the drying yard or on horses before the laundry fire, and then when it is dry the enormous separate labour of ironing, the heavy flat irons heated at the stove and wielded for hours, the goffering and the starching and the smoothing of every ruffle and frill in a family's elaborate dress, until at last the clean linen, sweet and pressed and folded, makes its way back to the linen room and the housekeeper's counting. It is brutal toil, the laundry, hot and wet and endless, ruinous to the hands and the back, and it is the price paid each week in the steam of the wash-house, or the spotless cuffs and the crisp white tablecloths that the family regards as no more than the natural condition of things. Down below even the kitchen, in the coolest and the deepest part of the foundations, lies the wine cellar, and it is the butler's second chief charge after the silver, a vaulted underground chamber where the family's wine is laid down and matured and guarded. A gentleman's house must have a serious cellar, for wine is among the most refined of the markers of standing, and the dinners that the household gives are accompanied by a careful procession of them, the sherry with the soup, the hock and the champagne through the courses, the claret and the port after, and all of it must be chosen and bought and laid down years before it is drunk, and kept in the dark and the cool and the stillness that wine demands. The cellar is lined with bins, the brick or stone compartments in which the bottles lie on their sides, layer upon layer, gathering their dust and their age, and the butler keeps a cellar book in which every bottle is recorded, what it is, and when it was laid down, and when it is drunk. For the cellar is a treasury as surely as the plate-room, and shrinkage in it. The quiet disappearance of a bottle here and there is a temptation and a danger that the careful butler guards against by knowing, always, exactly what he has. He alone holds the cellar key. He goes down with a candle to fetch up what is wanted for dinner, choosing with judgment, decanting the port and the old claret with a steady hand against the light of a candle flame to leave the sediment behind, and the wine arrives at the table in its decanter as if it had no history at all, when in truth it is the fruit of decisions made a decade ago and capital tied up in the dark for years, a slow and patient and expensive form of display laid down in brick vaults beneath the family's feet. To descend into the cellar is to enter the quietest place in the whole establishment, cool and dim and still, the dust thick on the sleeping bottles, the air heavy with the smell of cork and damp stone, a buried bank of pleasure maturing in the dark while the house lives its noisy life above. Consider next a labour so constant and so invisible that it has a room of its own, the war against the dark, for a large house before the full triumph of electricity is lit by a patchwork of flame, and flame is endless work. Even in a modern house piped for gas, the gas does not reach everywhere, and the family's most intimate apartments and the whole of the servants' side are lit by oil lamps and candles, and the keeping of these in order is a daily campaign waged from a place called the lamp room. Here, in a corner of the service quarters, the lamps of the whole establishment are brought each day to be tended, and the tending of them is exacting and dirty and ceaseless. For an oil lamp that is to burn clean and bright must be filled with oil, its wick trimmed to an exact evenness, or it will smoke and stink and blacken its chimney, its glass chimney washed and polished to perfect clarity, its reservoir cleaned of the gummy residue the oil leaves behind. A mansion may have dozens of lamps, and every one of them, every day, must be carried to the lamp room, emptied, filled, trimmed, wiped, and carried back to its place ready to be lit at dusk, and the work falls to a footman or to a servant kept almost for the purpose. Hands forever stained and smelling of paraffin. The candles are a labour too, made or bought by the gross, set in their holders, the spent ends collected, the better wax candles for the family's chambers, and the cheaper tallow, smoky and rank, for the servant's own use, so that the very quality of the light a person is given to see by is itself a mark of their rank in the residence. At dusk the evening lighting begins, a servant moving through the chambers with a taper as the daylight fails, and the family's world blooms into its warm evening glow, the lamps and the candles and the hissing gas, all lit and tended and trimmed by hands that will spend the next morning cleaning away the grime of tonight's burning, so that the simple fact of being able to see after dark, which the family never thinks about at all, rests on a daily and a filthy and a never-finished labour carried on in a little den that smells of oil. There is a smaller closet too near the back door that gathers up the odds and ends of the dirty work, and it goes by various names: the boot room, the brushing room, the knife room, and it is the province of the lowest of the male domestics, the hall boy, or the odd man, or the boots, the youth who does the rough jobs that fall to no one else. Here the boots and shoes of the whole household are blacked, a serious daily task in an age of unpaved lanes and muddy fields, every pair scraped and washed and blacked and polished and returned to its owner's door before morning. Here the knives are scoured, the steel table knives that tarnish and stain, and must be scoured bright on a knife board or in a knife cleaning machine, a tedious daily grind. Here the clothes are brushed, the mud sponged from the hems and the dust beaten from the coats. Here are done the 100 small, dirty, necessary jobs that keep the household turning, and that are too low for any domestic of standing to touch, and the boy who does them is the apprentice of the whole system, learning the work and the deference and the long hours at the bottom of the ladder, in the hope of climbing, in time, to footmen and beyond. It is in rooms like this, humble and unregarded, that the real foundations of the family's effortless elegance are laid, in the daily blacking of boots and scouring of knives by a boy whose name the family does not know, and it is worth remembering, as we move back toward the lit and lovely chambers above, how much of the beauty of the country house is built upon the patient drudgery of the very young and the very poor, done in the cold corners where the family never goes. Climb now by the back stair all the way to the top of the building, above even the family's grand bedroom floor, up under the very slates, and you reach the place where the servants sleep, and the contrast between these cells and the rooms below them is the whole story of the house told in plaster and floorboard. The servants' bedrooms are in the attics, the cheapest and least comfortable space in the building, hot under the slates in summer and bitterly chill in winter, lit by small dormer windows or by nothing at all, reached by the narrow uncarpeted back stair that the family never climbs. They are plain to the point of bareness, a chamber shared by 2 or 3 or more, furnished with iron bedsteads and thin mattresses, a washstand with a jug and basin, a few pegs for clothes, a single candle, and little else, the floor uncarpeted, the walls whitewashed. No fire in the grate, however, the wind howls. For fires are for the family, and warmth must not be wasted on the people who provide it. The maids who carry hot water up to the family's bedrooms wash in cold water themselves. The girls who lay 40 fires a day have none in their own room. After the long day's labour, they climb the last flight to these bare cells under the roof, and sleep the few hours allowed them, and rise in the dark to begin again. And the only privacy, and the only rest they know in the whole building, is found here, at the very top, in the meanest spaces of all. And directly below them, separated by a single floor, lie the bedrooms of the family, warm and carpeted and curtained, with fires burning and hot water brought, and the deep quiet of comfort, so that the house arranges its inhabitants vertically by their worth, the Ashworths in the warm middle floors, the chill, useless grandeur of the hall, and the reception rooms below, and at the top, nearest the weather and farthest from any comfort, the people who make the comfort possible, sleeping under the eaves in the cold, as close to the sky and as far from the warmth as the architecture can contrive to put them. Between the family's side and the servant's side there is a third realm in the household, neither quite the one nor the other, and that is the world of the children, kept apart in their own wing or their own floor, the nursery and the schoolroom and the bedrooms of the young, a separate small province with its own staff and its own routines and its own strange isolation. For the children of such a family are not raised by their parents in any sense a later age would recognize. They are raised by servants, in rooms set apart, and they see their mother and father for a brief scrubbed interval in the day, brought down clean and tidy, and on their best behaviour to be displayed in the drawing room after tea for an hour, and then taken up again to the nursery realm, that is their true home. That sphere is ruled by the nurse, the nanny, a servant of peculiar and intimate power who has the daily care of the children's bodies, and to whom they are often far more attached than to the mother who visits them. And as they grow it is shared by the governess, who comes to teach the girls and the youngest boys their letters and their accomplishments. The governess is the loneliest figure in the complete household, for she belongs nowhere in it. She is too genteel to eat with the domestics, being a lady by birth fallen on hard times, and not genteel enough to be a member of the family, but being paid for her presence. And so she lives suspended between the two stations, taking her meals often alone or in the schoolroom, neither upstairs nor down, an educated woman in a household that has no place for her, tolerated, useful, and profoundly solitary. And the children grow up apart in this fashion, loved and tended by people paid to love and tend them, learning very early the lesson the whole house teaches, that some people exist to serve and others to be served, absorbing it not as a cruelty, but as the simple shape of the world, so that the weaver's great-grandchildren are formed, in their nursery, into the gentry their great-grandfather dreamed of, by the hands of women who will never be anything but servants themselves. Return one last time to the bedroom floor, to the most private of all their apartments, the bedrooms and the dressing rooms and the ladies' boudoir, for even here, in the innermost sanctum of their privacy, the hidden labour reaches in, and the intimacy of these rooms has its own attendant servants. The mistress has her boudoir, a small private sitting room off her bedroom, the one corner of the household that is wholly and only hers, where she writes her letters and keeps her most personal things, and withdraws from even the family, and beyond it the bedroom and the dressing room, where the long and elaborate business of dressing a lady of fashion is conducted. For a woman of this rank cannot dress herself, the clothes will not permit it. The stays must be laced from behind, the hair dressed and pinned in its complicated arrangement, the many small fastings of the elaborate gowns done up by another's fingers, and so she has her lady's maid, the most personal of all the female servants, who lives in close attendance on her mistress's body and her wardrobe, who knows her secrets and her stays and her false hair if she has it, who dresses and undresses her several times a day as the rituals of the household demand, the morning dress, and the walking dress, and the afternoon dress, and the grandest transformation of all, the dressing for dinner, when the lady is bathed and corseted and gowned and jewelled and coiffed into the magnificent creature who will sweep down the grand stair to receive her guests. The master likewise has his valet, his gentleman's gentleman, who keeps his clothes in flawless order, shaves him, dresses him, and attends to the 1,000 details of a gentleman's turnout. These body servants, the lady's maid and the valet, stand at the top of the servant hierarchy precisely because of their intimacy with the family, and they live the strangest lives of all the staff, closer to their employers than anyone yet attendant still, privy to every private thing, and bound to perfect discretion, dressing and undressing the very bodies of the people they serve, present at the most intimate moments of the day and invisible at all the rest, the final and most personal expression of a household, in which even the act of putting on one's own clothes is performed by the hands of another. The hidden world does not end at the walls of the house, for a large establishment spills outward into a ring of yards and buildings that serve it, and the most important of these is the stable, the mews, the kingdom of the horse, which in this age, before the motor, is the indispensable engine of all movement. A family of this rank keeps a sizable stable, the carriage horses matched in pairs for the look of them, the riding horses for the gentlemen and the ladies, the rough cobs and ponies for the children, and the work of the estate, and these animals require a small staff and a considerable set of buildings all their own, set a little apart from the dwelling, so that the smell and the muck of them shall not carry. The stable yard is a world of its own, ruled by the coachman, a figure of considerable dignity and curious independence, half servant and half master in his own domain, who answers for the horses and the carriages and the grooms and stable boys beneath him. The carriages themselves are kept gleaming in the coach house, the heavy closed carriage for town and bad weather, the lighter open carriages for fine days, each one cleaned and polished and kept ready, costly objects in themselves, and another legible mark of the family's wealth, for the turnout of a family's carriage, the gloss of the paint, and the silver of the harness, and the matched stepping of the horses and the bearing of the coachman on his box, is read by the world exactly as the silver and the footmen are read. The work of the mews is unceasing and physical, the horses fed and watered and groomed and exercised, the stalls mucked out, the harness cleaned and soaped and polished, the carriages washed, all of it carried on from before dawn in a yard that has its own hierarchy and its own pride, separate from the mansion and yet bound to it, ready at any hour to put a horse between the shafts and carry the family wherever the household wishes to go, so that even the family's movement through the wider world rests, like everything else, on the labour of people kept out of sight in a yard behind the trees. Beyond the stable yard, the hidden establishment widens further still into the estate itself, for a house like Hertsmere is not merely a dwelling, but the centre of a small agricultural and horticultural empire that exists in large part to supply it. There is the kitchen garden, often walled, a broad productive space of vegetable beds and fruit trees and forcing frames, tended by a head gardener and his under gardeners, that sends a daily supply of fresh produce to the kitchen, the peas and the beans and the soft fruit in their season, and in the heated glass houses, the luxuries that proclaim a serious garden, the grapes and the peaches and the melons and the pineapples coaxed to ripeness under glass in the English climate by sheer skill and expense, set on the dinner table to astonish the guests with fruit no money could simply buy. There are the pleasure grounds, the lawns and the shrubberies and the formal beds, kept immaculate by another set of hands, mown and weeded and edged and planted out afresh each season with thousands of bedding plants raised for the purpose. There is the home farm, supplying the milk and the butter and the eggs and the meat, and the woods managed for game and for timber, and the whole apparatus of an estate that employs beyond the indoor servants entirely a second small population of outdoor workers, the gardeners and the gamekeepers and the farmhands and the woodmen and the grooms, each in their own hierarchy under their own headman. The family at the centre of all this sees only the results, the flowers in the vases, the fruit on the table, the smooth lawns and the well-stocked larders, and takes these, as it takes everything, as the natural yield of its position, while around it, in the gardens and the glass houses and the farmyard and the woods, an army of men and boys labours from dawn to produce the plenty and the beauty that the household consumes. Who were they, all these people, the indoor servants and the outdoor workers, the butlers and the scullery maids and the gardeners and the grooms, and why did they give their lives to the service of a family not their own? They came overwhelmingly from the poor, from the cottages of the countryside and the crowded streets of the towns, the children of labourers and small tradesmen, and the rural poor, for whom service was very often the only respectable employment to be had, and the country house the largest employer for miles around. A girl of 12 or 13 would be sent out to her first place, a boy likewise, leaving home to live in the house of strangers, and there they would begin at the very bottom, as scullery maid or hall boy, and work, if they were able and steady and fortunate, slowly up the long ladder of rank over many years, the maid rising to housemaid and perhaps to lady's maid or housekeeper, the boy to footman and perhaps to butler, a whole career spent within the walls of other people's houses. The conditions were hard, the hours brutal, the wages small, paid by the year and supplemented by the keep and the cast-off clothes and the tips from departing guests and the loss of a place, through illness or a fault or the simple whim of an employer, could be a catastrophe, for a domestic turned off without a character, without the written reference that was the passport to the next place, might find every door closed. And yet it was, for all that, a form of security that the poor of the age did not lightly despise, a roof and a bed and food and warmth in a world where these could not be taken for granted, a footing in a settled order, the chance of advancement, and for the fortunate few who rose to the top, a position of real responsibility and a measure of respect. They gave their youth and their strength, and very often their whole working lives to it, these hidden people, and most of them passed through the world leaving no record but a name in a wage book and a line in a census, the uncounted multitude on whose labour the whole glittering edifice of the country house, and the leisured world it sheltered, was raised and maintained. We have dwelt on the grand reception rooms, the spaces of display, but the family does not pass its ordinary days in those, and there is a quieter suite of apartments for the family's own daily use that is worth a moment. The morning room, and the breakfast room, and the boudoir, and the study. The spaces where the real domestic life goes on when there is no company to perform for. The morning room is the mistress's daytime headquarters, a pleasant chamber facing east to catch the morning sun, less formal than the drawing-room and more comfortable, where she sits to write her letters and plan her day and receive the housekeeper and deal with the unending business of the household. The breakfast-room, smaller and warmer than the formal dining-room, is where the family gathers in the morning to a meal laid out on the sideboard in covered silver dishes, kept hot over spirit lamps, the bacon and the eggs and the kidneys and the kedgeree, a leisurely informal meal at which the family serves itself, a small daily mercy for the footmen who are spared the full ceremony of attendance. The gentleman has his study or his office, where he deals with the affairs of the estate and the correspondence of his far-off mills, the one corner of this monument to leisure in which the actual source of all the money, the unromantic ongoing labour of running a vast industrial concern, intrudes upon the dream of landed ease. These daytime quarters are the closest the home comes to ordinary domesticity, the spaces where the family is most itself and least on show, and yet even here the same invisible service flows, the fires lit before they wake, the breakfast kept hot by hidden hands, the letters carried out to the post and the answers brought in, the chambers tidied and set straight in the brief intervals when the Ashworths are elsewhere, so that even the family's private and unbuttoned hours rest on the same unceasing foundation of unseen work as their grandest performances. The running of all this is itself a daily ritual, and it begins each morning with a small ceremony that is the true seat of the household's government, the meeting of the mistress and the housekeeper. After breakfast in the morning room, the housekeeper attends upon her mistress with her keys and her books, and the two women settle the business of the day, the planning of the meals and the ordering of the stores, the discussion of which rooms are to be turned out, the management of the staff, the arrangements for any guests expected, the whole complex administration of a large household, conducted in a quiet half-hour over the account books. The cook comes too, in many houses, to discuss the day's menus, to propose and have approved the dinner that will be sent up, a negotiation between the mistress's wishes and the cook's knowledge of what the larders hold and the season allows. It is in these morning conferences that the mistress does the real work of her position, for the management of a household of this size is a genuine executive labour, the direction of 24 or more employees, the control of a sizable budget, the maintenance of standards across 12 departments, and a clever and capable mistress runs it as ably as her husband runs his mills, though her management is exercised entirely through her 2 chief officers, the housekeeper for the female side and the indoor stores, the butler for the male staff and the cellar and the plate. Through them her wishes flow down into the lower dwelling and become the day's labour, the orders given at 9 o'clock translating, by noon, into scrubbed floors and aired spaces and a planned dinner. The whole machine directed from that quiet morning room by a woman who will never herself lift a duster, issuing her commands to the capable subordinates, who turn her word into the seamless comfort she takes as her due. Once a day, and only once, the 2 separate worlds of the house are brought together in one space, and it happens at morning prayers that the daily act of household worship that gathers the family and the entire body of staff into a single assembly. It is a custom of the devout households of this age, and the Ashworths, climbing socially as they are, observe it with care, for it is among the marks of a well-ordered Christian establishment. After breakfast a bell is rung, and the servants file in order of their rank, into the dining room or the hall, or wherever prayers are held, the upper staff first and the lower following, the men on one side and the women on the other, and they stand or kneel in their places, while the master of the house, taking the part of the priest of his own little kingdom, reads the morning prayers and a passage of Scripture, the entire household bowed together before the same God. It is the one moment in the entire day when the family and the servants occupy the same room as something like a single community, when the scullery maid and the mistress kneel within a few feet of one another, and it is freighted with a quiet significance because of it, a daily enacting of the idea that bound the whole arrangement together, the idea that the country house was a kind of family, an ordered Christian household, in which each rank had its appointed place and its mutual duties, the master responsible for the souls and the welfare of his people, as they were responsible for his service. Whether the servants kneeling on the cold floor felt themselves part of one family with the people they waited on, or whether they knelt and thought their own thoughts and waited for the amen that would send them back to their work, we cannot know. But for those few minutes, each morning the green baize door stood open, the 2 worlds met in the one apartment, and the household acknowledged, in the language of prayer, the human beings it spent the rest of the day so carefully keeping out of sight. For all the relentlessness of the labour, the servants below stairs were not machines, and they made in the cracks and corners of the long day a life of their own, and it is worth pausing on that hidden inner life before we leave them, for it is the part the family saw least of all. Such leisure as the servants had was scant and precious. The half-day off in the week, the few hours on a Sunday after church, the rare whole day to visit family, and within those narrow margins they did what people everywhere do. They courted and quarrelled and gossiped and dreamed. The servants' hall in the evening, when the work at last slackened, was their parlour, where they sat by their own fire and talked and sewed and read aloud and played cards, where the older domestics told tales of the grand houses they had served in and the famous people they had waited on, where the young ones laughed and flirted under the watchful eye of the upper servants. There were romances, of course, though they were difficult and often forbidden, for many households would not keep a maid who married, and a courtship between a footman and a housemaid had to be conducted in stolen moments and whispered words, for the 2 were kept rigorously apart by the rules of the house, and watched by the housekeeper for any sign of impropriety. There were letters home, written laboriously by those who could write, carrying news and a little of the wages back to the cottages the servants had come from. And once or twice a year, at the chief festivals, there might be a real loosening, a servants' ball at Christmas when the household by long custom opened a hall to their staff, and even, in a striking reversal, waited on them for an evening, the whole rigid order turned upside down for a single night before it closed again. It was a circumscribed life, lived in the margins of other people's, with little privacy and less freedom, and yet it was a life, with its own warmth and its own loyalties and its own small joys, carried on in the firelit servants' hall after the bells had finally fallen silent, and the family had gone up to bed. Back above the green door, there is a masculine quarter of the house we have not yet entered, the domain of the gentleman's sporting life, and it has its own dedicated spaces, for in this age the country establishment is above all a place for sport, and the killing of game is the chief occupation and the great social ritual of the landed gentleman. There is the gun room, where the sporting guns are kept, locked and oiled and racked, the cartridges stored, the cleaning done, a serious and business-like space presided over by a servant who knows weapons, for a gentleman's guns are fine and costly and dangerous, and must be perfectly maintained. There is the business of the shoot itself, the great organised days when the guns assemble, and the gamekeepers and the beaters drive the birds, an elaborate spectacle, employing dozens of men and resting on the year-round labour of the keepers who rear the game and guard it from poachers. And there is the bachelor wing in many a country house, a set of chambers set somewhat apart, where the unmarried male guests are lodged, conveniently distant from the young ladies of the family and near to the gun-room and the billiard-room and the smoking-room, the masculine end of the house where the men may be noisy and late and at their ease. All of this sporting apparatus is another face of the same ambition that built the house, for to shoot and to hunt and to keep a good head of game is among the surest marks of the gentleman, a way of life the new rich Ashworths take up as eagerly as they took up the building of a baronial hall, and it too generates its own hidden labour, but the keepers and the beaters and the loaders and the men who clean the guns and carry the game, an entire economy of sport, sustaining the few days of pleasure when the master and his guests walk out with their guns to enact the ancient pastime of the landed class they so wish to join. When guests come to stay, as they constantly do in the social campaign of such an establishment, a whole further apparatus of concealment and management swings into action, for the arranging of a house party is among the most delicate of the mistress's arts. The guest bedrooms must be made ready, aired and warmed and furnished with every comfort, fires lit in them well ahead, fresh flowers set out, writing paper laid in, and a maid and a man assigned to attend the visitors who do not bring their own servants. The allocation of the bedrooms is itself a matter of careful thought, for who is placed near whom carries meanings that the experienced hostess reads and writes with consummate skill. The honoured visitors in the best chambers, the families together, the young people decorously distributed, and there is a quiet worldliness in the management of it. For the country house was not always so innocent as its morning prayers suggested, and a wise hostess understood the discreet adjustments of the bedroom plan that allowed the private arrangements of her grander visitors to proceed by night along the dim corridors, without scandal and without remark. The guests' own domestics, the visiting valets and ladies' maids who arrive with them, must be absorbed into the household below stairs for the duration, fed and housed and fitted into the hierarchy of the servants' hall, according to the rank of the master or mistress they serve, a temporary swelling of the hidden population that the housekeeper must manage. And through it all the same iron discipline of invisibility holds, the visitors moving through their comfortable visit, attended at every turn by attendants who appear and vanish, their chambers tended while they are at breakfast, their clothes cleaned and pressed overnight, their every need anticipated and met by a hidden organisation working at full stretch behind the green doors, so that the house party, that characteristic pleasure of the Victorian rich, floats upon an ocean of labour as serenely as the family's ordinary days, and rather more strenuously. There is one space in the family's world that belongs to neither the masculine nor the feminine quarter, but stands apart as a marvel of the age, and that is the conservatory, the winter garden of glass and iron that the wealth of the century has made possible and fashionable. Built out from the residence, a vast structure of slender iron ribs and curved glass, warmed by hidden pipes of hot water, so that it stays summer within, while winter grips the gardens without. The conservatory is a pleasure ground of exotic green, filled with the palms and the ferns and the camellias and the orchids that the age adores, the tender plants of warmer climates kept alive and flourishing in the English damp by the genius of the gardeners and the marvel of the heating apparatus. It is a place to stroll on a winter afternoon among the dripping greenery and the scent of damp earth and flowering things, a fragment of the tropics annexed to a house in the cold shires, and it is, like everything else, both a genuine delight and a calculated display, for to keep a grand conservatory in full bloom through an English winter is an extravagance that announces wealth as clearly as any silver. The glass alone, in an age that still taxes it heavily within living memory, speaks of money and the heating of all that space, the boilers that must be stoked day and night to keep the cold at bay, the gardeners who tend precious plants and replace them the instant they flag. All of it is costly beyond what most could dream of, and all of it is hidden. The boiler stokers and the under-gardeners labouring out of sight to maintain the illusion of effortless eternal summer through which the family strolls of an afternoon, admiring the orchids in the depth of the year. It is easy, walking through this glittering world, to forget that the people who served it were mortal, and grew sick and grew old, and the question of what became of them then is among the hardest the country house poses. For the most part, the servant who fell ill was a problem the household met with a mixture of genuine care and hard practicality. A valued upper servant, who sickened, might be nursed, given the still-room remedies, attended by the same doctor who attended the family, allowed to recover in a degree of comfort, for a good domestic was an investment, and a loyalty ran both ways in the better households. But a lower servant, a housemaid laid low by the very labour that consumed her, might find herself simply unable to keep her place, for the labour did not stop for sickness, and a household needed hands that could labour, and a maid too ill to carry her cans of water was a maid who could not earn her keep. And old age was the sharpest difficulty of all, for service was a young person's life built on strength and stamina, and the body wore out under it, the knees ruined by the stairs and the scrubbing, the hands by the cold water, the back by the lifting, and the servant who grew too old to do the tasks faced a frightening prospect in an age with no pension, as of right, and no safety net beneath the poor. The fortunate few, the old retainers who had given a lifetime to a single family, might be kept on in some light capacity, or pensioned off in a cottage on the estate, or left a small annuity, rewarded for their long fidelity by a secure old age. But many more, worn out in the service of households that felt no such obligation, were simply let go when they could no longer work, to fall back on whatever family would take them in, or on the savings they had scraped from their tiny wages, or, in the worst case, on the workhouse, the dreaded last refuge of the destitute old. The same toil that built the family's comfort consumed the bodies of those who performed it, and when the body was used up, the house, for all its wealth, very often had no further use for it, and the worn-out servant passed out of the warm, bright world they had spent their lives maintaining, into an old age as cold and uncertain as the attic cells they had slept in. Behind all of this stands a simple and a staggering fact that the Ashworths never discussed, and the servants knew to the penny, which is what the whole establishment cost. For a great house was an engine for the conversion of money into appearances on a scale that is hard now to grasp. The building of Hertsmere itself swallowed a fortune, a sum that would have bought a street of ordinary houses, and the running of it swallowed another fortune every year without end. There were the wages, 24 and more indoor servants, and as many again outdoors, each paid by the year, the butler and the housekeeper and the cook commanding real salaries, the lower servants paid in shillings, but paid all the same, a bill that ran on whether the family was in residence or not. There was the food, the feeding not only of the family and their endless guests, but of the whole standing army of servants, who ate at the family's expense, a daily provisioning on the scale of a small hotel. There were the coal and the gas and the oil and the candles, the horses and their fodder, the upkeep of the gardens and the glass houses and the stables and the estate, the constant repair and renewal that a vast building demands, the wine laid down and the silver bought and the carriages maintained, an outpouring of money in 100 channels that together amounted to a sum that only a very large income indeed could sustain. And that in the end is the plainest truth about the hidden world and the visible one alike, that the whole of it, the beautiful chambers and the buried labour, the silver and the scullery, the conservatory and the coal cellar, rested upon and was paid for by the relentless productivity of the mills in distant Lancashire, the looms turning day and night, the operatives at their machines, so that the silence and the beauty and the leisure of the country house were bought. In the end, with the noise and the toil of the industrial world, the family had built this complete green dream to forget. We have spoken of fires and coal and water, but the largest single labour of the female staff, the one that never ends and is never finished, is the war against dust and dirt, the daily cleaning of a vast and crowded mansion in an age that fought grime with nothing but muscle and ingenuity. Think of what there was to clean. Acres of carpet, to be swept by hand with a stiff brush on the knees, or taken up and carried out and beaten on a line until the dust flew, for there is no easier way. Floors of polished wood to be rubbed and waxed, marble and stone to be scrubbed, miles of skirting and moulding and carved panelling on which dust settles in a film each day and from which it must be wiped anew every morning. The countless ornaments of the drawing-room, each to be lifted and dusted and set down in its exact place. The mirrors and the windows, scores of them, to be polished to invisibility. The brass and the steel, the fenders and the fire irons and the door furniture to be polished till they blazed. The beds to be stripped and made. The washstands to be filled and emptied. The chamber pots to be carried down and cleaned. This is a mansion without the plumbing to spare most chambers that office. And the soot, above all the soot, the fine black fall from 40 coal fires and 100 lamps and candles settling everywhere, on each surface and every fold of fabric, so that the cleaning was not a thing done once and finished, but a tide that came in again, the moment it was driven back. A Sisyphean daily battle waged with brush and cloth and beeswax and elbow grease and an endless carrying of water, by housemaids who measured out their lives in the chambers. They scrubbed and scrubbed again, keeping at bay, by sheer unremitting effort, the dirt that a coal-burning, candle-lit, horse-drawn world produced without cease. Of all the hours in the long day, one stands above the rest, for the pitch of effort it demands on both sides of the green door at once, and that is the hour before dinner, when the two separate worlds of the mansion reach their highest tension and their closest, most carefully managed contact. Upstairs, the family is dressing, and the dressing for dinner is itself an elaborate undertaking, the lady's maid and the valet at their most fully employed, the bath water carried up, the elaborate toilette performed, the family transformed by degrees from their daytime selves into the formal jewelled creatures who will descend to dine. And below, at the very same moment, the kitchen has reached the crisis of its day, the cook and her maids in a controlled frenzy as a dozen dishes come to their readiness at once, the timing of a great dinner being the cruelest of arts, every course needing to arrive hot and perfect at its appointed minute through a long evening. The butler is in his pantry giving the wine its final attention, decanting, checking the temperature, marshalling his forces. The footmen are dressing in their livery. The table has been laid to the inch, the dining room fires built up, the candles waiting to be lit. And then the family comes down, and the performance begins, and for 2 or 3 hours the whole hidden establishment bends its entire strength to the single task of sending up, course after course in perfect sequence and perfect silence, a dinner that must appear to the diners as the most natural and effortless thing imaginable. It is the daily summit of the whole arrangement, the moment when all the buried labour of the day, the provisioning and the cooking and the cleaning and the polishing, surfaces at last in the form of a serene and glittering meal, and then sinks again the moment dinner ends, back into the washing up and the clearing and the carrying that will go on, below stairs, long after the household has risen from the table and withdrawn, satisfied, to the drawing-room, with no notion of the storm of effort that their 3 hours at table had set raging beneath their feet. A mansion of this kind, for all its high walls and its careful seclusion, is not sealed off from the world. It has a constant, busy, hidden traffic with the country round about, and that traffic flows through one point, the back door, the tradesman's entrance, the unregarded threshold through which everything the household consumes makes its way in. To the back door come the carts and the carriers and the messengers, all day and every day. The butcher's boy with the day's meat, the baker, the fishmonger, the man from the grocer's with the tea and the sugar and the spices, the carrier with parcels from the town, the post twice a day or more, all arriving not at the grand front entrance that the family uses, but at the humble service door at the rear, where the goods are received and checked and carried into the larders and the stores by the staff. It is here that the household's money flows out into the local economy, for an establishment of this size is the largest customer for miles, its custom sought and prized by every tradesman in the district, its account a thing to be courted, and the housekeeper and the cook, who order the goods and check them in and query the bills, wield a real power in the local world of commerce that their humble station might not suggest. The staff themselves are paid, beyond their wages, in ways that bind them to this backdoor economy, the perquisites and the tips and, in some houses, the board wages given when the family is away, and there were old and tacit arrangements, not always quite honest, by which a cook might take her commission from the tradesman she favoured, the small corruptions that flourished at the meeting point of a great spending household, and the people who supplied it. The front of the mansion presents its serene and changeless face to the world of equals who arrive by the drive. The back of it hums all day with the real and grubby business of provisioning, the carts coming and going, the money changing hands, the unglamorous commerce on which the whole glittering performance, in the end, depends. The mansion does not live at the same pitch all the year round, for the family that owns it is not always in it, and the rhythm of its life follows the great seasonal migration of the wealthy between country and town. For some months of the year, in the season, the family removes to its house in London, drawn to the capital by the round of balls and parties and the business of the marriage market and the sitting of Parliament, and at other times it travels to the seaside or the spa or the houses of friends or abroad. And when the family departs, the country mansion does not simply stand empty, it enters a kind of sleep, a reduced and skeleton existence quite unlike its full-dress life. The grand reception rooms are shut up, the shutters closed, the curtains drawn against the dwindling light, and over all the fine furniture are spread the ghostly dust sheets, the chandeliers bagged in muslin, the carpets covered or rolled away, so that the splendid chambers become a still, dim museum of shrouded shapes, waiting. The full staff is not needed, and many of the servants travel with the household or are stood down, leaving behind only a skeleton household, a few maids and a man or two under the housekeeper, to keep the place aired and guarded and ready, to light the occasional fire against the damp, to wage a slower version of the endless war on dust through the sleeping chambers. And then when word comes that the family is returning, the mansion is woken in a great convulsion of preparation, the sheets whipped off, the shutters thrown open, the fires lit in every grate, the whole place scoured from top to bottom and brought back from its dim hibernation to its whole blazing life, ready for the carriage that will sweep up the drive and bring the Ashworths home to a house that seems never to have slept at all. This rhythm of opening and shutting, of teeming life and skeleton sleep, was the deep seasonal pulse of the country mansion, and it meant that the servants' own lives followed the family's movements. Their year shaped around the comings and goings of people whose convenience was the first law of their existence. When night comes down in earnest, and the Ashworths have gone up at last to bed, the mansion enters its most vulnerable hours, and the keeping of it safe through the dark is the final duty of the day. Fire is the great terror of such a place, and with reason, for a building packed with timber and fabric, and lit by open flame, warmed by dozens of coal fires hung with curtains and stuffed with furniture, is a tinderbox waiting for a spark, and the history of the age is littered with the burning of fine houses, gutted in a night by a fallen candle, or a chimney fire, or an overheated flue. So the banking and the guarding of the fires at night is a serious office, the embers damped and screened, the candles snuffed, a watch kept against the smell of smoke. There is the fear of intrusion too, of the burglar drawn to a house known to be full of silver, and so the locking and the barring of doors and windows, the securing of the plate, the loosing of the dogs in the yard, are part of the nightly ritual. The mansion at night is a different place from the mansion by day, the bright chambers gone dark and still, the long corridors black and silent, the only light the candle of a domestic moving late on some last errand, or the glow of a banked fire. The only sound the tick of the clocks and the creak of the cooling timbers, and far off, the stamp of a horse in the stable. The two worlds that have laboured all day to keep apart are both now asleep under the one roof, the family in their warm curtained beds on the middle floors, the servants in their cold cells under the slates, and between them, through the dark, runs the hidden architecture we have walked all evening. The back stairs empty now, the bells still, the kitchen banked, the whole machine at rest, holding its breath through the short hours until the first maid wakes in the dark, and it all begins again. Stand back now, before we make our last circuit, and consider the mansion whole, for once you have seen both of its worlds you can never again see it as the Ashworths saw it, or as the visitor on a wet afternoon sees it. And what you understand instead is that the building is a diagram, a thing that thinks in stone, an argument about the order of society made solid and habitable. Every line of its plan encodes a belief about who matters and who does not. The grand rooms face the gardens and the view, the working quarters face the yard and the wall. The family stairs are wide and lit and beautiful. The servants' stairs are narrow and dark and hidden. The family lives in the warm middle of the building, wrapped in comfort. The servants are pushed to the cold edges, the attic and the basement, the hot kitchen and the freezing scullery, the margins where the weather gets in. The doors the Ashworths use are made to be seen and admired. The doors the servants use are made to disappear, and running through all of it, dividing it, is that one green-baized line, the border between the served and the serving, drawn through every floor and every passage of the building, so that the mansion is not merely a place where a particular society lived, but a three-dimensional model of that society's deepest convictions, its faith that some are born to ease and some to labour, that the labour should be total and the labourers invisible, that a few should live in beauty upon the unseen toil of many. To walk through the mansion with open eyes as we have done tonight is to read that conviction written into each wall and stair and concealed door, the entire vast and beautiful and troubling structure, standing as the truest portrait we have of the world that built it, a world that believed, with its whole heart and its whole architecture, in the keeping of people in their places. Let us follow one of them through a single day, a housemaid of perhaps 18, and see the life from inside it, for the abstractions of routine come alive only in one body's experience of them. She wakes in the black cold before 5, called by the alarm or by the older maid she shares her attic bed closet with, and she dresses in the dark in her print working dress, her fingers stiff, her breath showing, and goes down the back stair by candlelight into the silent sleeping mansion. Her first hours are the dirtiest of the day, the grates, and she goes from one to the next on her knees, raking out the dead ashes, cleaning and black-leading the iron, laying and lighting the new fire, her hands and her apron blacking as she works, so that warmth shall be waiting for the family who still sleep above her. She sweeps and dusts the downstairs reception rooms while they are empty, opens the shutters, lets in the grey first light. She carries the heavy cans of hot water up the back stair to the bedrooms, can after can, and sets them by the washstands, and draws the curtains and calls the family gently and lays their morning fires. And only then, the family stirring into its day, does she snatch her own hurried breakfast below stairs before the next tide of work, the making of the beds, the emptying and scouring of the bedroom china, the long grind of dusting and sweeping and polishing that fills the morning. So it goes on and on, the bells calling her, the stairs climbed and climbed again, the dinner service in the evening, the clearing after, until at last, near 11 or midnight, with her feet aching and her back sore, and her hands roughened past her years, she climbs the last cold flight to her attic and falls into bed, to sleep a few hours before the dark wakes her to do it all again, 6 days in 7, season upon season, for wages of a few pounds a 12-month, and her keep, in the prime of a youth she is spending, flight by flight and great by great, on the comfort of people whose faces she sees, but whose lives she will never share. What did they eat? All these working bodies for an establishment that fed its people on many-coursed dinners had also to feed its own small population, and the servants' food is a revealing measure of their standing. They ate well enough by the standards of the labouring poor they came from, and that was part of the attraction of service. For the servants' table was supplied from the same kitchen as the family's, and there was meat most days, and bread and cheese and beer and tea, plain and plentiful fare that a farm labourer's child might never have known at home. But there was a strict economy in it, and a clear hierarchy too, for the best of everything went up to the family, and what came back down, the remains of the joints, the dishes not finished, the food that had served its turn above, found its way to the servants' table in a descending order of quality that matched the descending order of rank. The upper domestics ate better than the lower, taking the choicer portions, sometimes dining separately on finer fare, while the kitchen maid and the scullery maid made do with the plainer stuff and the leavings. There were customary rights and customary grievances around the food, the perquisites that certain staff claimed, the drippings and the cast-offs that were understood to be theirs, the small daily economies and resentments of a household where what one ate was a mark of what one was. And the cook who controlled the kitchen controlled this too, and a generous cook or a mean one made a real difference to the daily comfort of the staff, so that the woman at the range held, in her ladling of the servants' dinner, a small domestic power over the well-being of everyone below her, one more gradation in the endlessly graded world below the green door. It would be a mistake to imagine the servants as a contented household pulling together, for below the green door, as in any close community of people thrown together by work, there was friction and rivalry and the constant low pressure of a rigid hierarchy, and the tyranny of rank could be felt more sharply there than anywhere upstairs. The upper servants ruled the lower with an authority that could be kindly or could be cruel, and a harsh housekeeper or an overbearing butler or a cook with a temper could make the lives of the maids beneath them a daily misery, for the lower servant had little protection and nowhere to appeal, dependent for her very character, the reference on which her future hung, on the goodwill of the superior she served under. The strict separation of the sexes bred its own tensions. The footmen and the maids kept apart and watched, the natural attractions of young people forced into secrecy or punished. The snobberies were fierce, the lady's maid who gave herself airs from her closeness to the mistress, the resentment of the hall at the upper servant's withdrawal to the privileged comfort of the housekeeper's room, the careful policing of who might speak to whom, and in what tone. New servants were tried and tested, and sometimes tormented by the established staff. And over all of it lay the simple grinding pressure of the work itself, and the long hours and the want of privacy and freedom, conditions that could forge real loyalty and friendship, but could also curdle into spite and pettiness, so that the servants' hall, that warm, fire-lit refuge, was also a little kingdom of its own politics, its alliances and its feuds, its tyrannies large and small, a human society as complicated and as capable of unkindness as the grander one it existed to serve. Return upstairs for a while, to the daylight life of the mistress, for her days had their own rituals as fixed and as demanding in their way as any servants, and they were the very work of the family's social advancement. The mornings were for the household, the conference with the housekeeper, the ordering of the day. But the afternoons belonged to the elaborate and exacting business of calling, the system of formal visits by which the women of this society maintained the web of acquaintance that was their family's standing. A lady went out in her carriage in the afternoon to leave cards and pay calls, a visit of precisely the right and rather brief length conducted by rules of bewildering intricacy, who must be called upon, and who need only have a card left, the turning down of a corner, the leaving of the husband's cards as well as one's own, the whole silent language of pasteboard by which this world signalled acceptance and acquaintance, and the subtle gradations of intimacy. And on her own at-home day, the fixed afternoon when she let it be known she would receive, she stayed in the drawing-room and waited to be called upon in her turn, the tea-things ready, the maid primed to show the visitors up, and there she sat through the procession of callers, making the light practised conversation, the talk of weather and acquaintance and nothing of consequence. That was the medium of the whole performance. It seems a frivolous round, this endless paying and receiving of calls, and yet it was deadly serious work, the maintenance of its position in the only currency that mattered, social recognition, conducted by the mistress as the field marshal of the family's campaign, every call a move in the long game of being accepted, of being the kind of family whose cards the right people kept, and whose at-home day the right people attended, the slow patient construction, visit by visit, of the social standing that all the money and all the building was ultimately meant to buy. The family stood at the head not only of its own household, but of a wider community, for a country seat came with a place in the parish and a set of duties and powers that went with the land, and the family's relations with the village and the church and the poor were part of the whole edifice of its position. The Ashworths attended the parish church, sitting in the family pew at the front, set apart and slightly raised, a visible enactment of their rank before God and the congregation, the attendants filling the pews behind, the village beyond them. The master, as a considerable landowner, might hold the gift of the living, the right to appoint the parson, and would certainly be a power in the parish, a magistrate perhaps, dispensing a rough local justice, a figure to be deferred to and petitioned, and the Ashworths practised charity, as their station required, the lady visiting the deserving poor of the village with baskets and good advice, the Christmas doles and the soup in hard winters, the patronage of the school and the almshouse, the whole apparatus of paternalism by which the rich of this age acknowledged a duty to the poor around them, and at the same time confirmed the order that kept them rich and the others poor. It was charity from above, gracious and real and limited, given to the deserving and withheld from the troublesome, an expression of genuine Christian feeling and of the comfortable conviction that the social order was ordained, and that the duty of the great was to be kind within it rather than to question it. The family at the centre of the parish, in its raised pew and its visiting carriage, was performing the oldest role of the landed class, the benevolent head of a little world, and the new rich Ashworths took up that role as eagerly as they had taken up the building and the shooting, for to be looked up to by a grateful village was among the sweetest of the things that land could buy. Death came to the great dwelling as it came everywhere, and when it came it was met with an elaborate ceremony, for this was an age that had made a high art of mourning and surrounded death with ritual as dense as the ritual of dinner. When a member of the family died, the whole household was drawn into the observance. The blinds were lowered and the shutters half closed, casting the apartments into a permanent twilight. The mirrors were veiled, the clocks sometimes stopped at the hour of death. They went into mourning, into the heavy black that custom prescribed, the deep mourning of the first long period giving way by careful stages to the half-mourning of grey and mauve, the widow most heavily and longest shrouded of all, veiled in black crape for many months, her grief made visible and compulsory in her dress. The servants, too, were put into mourning, given black clothes or black armbands at the family's expense. The household's loss displayed even by its hidden members. There was the laying out of the body, often in the house, the darkened chamber where the dead lay while the family paid their respects, the funeral with its plumed horses and its mutes and its slow procession, the complete costly pageantry of Victorian death. And then the long aftermath of mourning, the household secluded from society for a prescribed period, the gradual return by stages to the world. It was a heavy and a formal way of grief, and it could seem to a later age more concerned with show than with sorrow. And yet beneath the crape and the ceremony was real loss, felt in the great house as in the cottage, the one experience that came alike to the Ashworths in their warm rooms and the servants in their cold ones, the single democracy of the whole divided establishment, that all of them, master and maid alike, were mortal, and would in their turn lie still, while the blinds were drawn and the living went on without them. And remember, through all of this, what the whole vast machine was ultimately for it was not merely to keep the Ashworths comfortable in their own lifetime, but to accomplish something slower and more ambitious, the transformation of the family itself across the generations, from cotton into gentry, and the children were the vessel of that long design. The weaver's great-grandchildren must be made into something their great-grandfather could not have been, and the making was deliberate and costly, and began in the nursery. The boys would go away to the great public schools, to be drilled in the classics they would mostly forget, and the accent and the bearing they would keep for life, and then to the university, not so much to learn as to acquire the polish and the connections and the unmistakable manner of a gentleman, the manner that announces itself without a word, and that no amount of money can buy directly but only grow, over time, in the right hothouse. The girls would be educated at home by the governess in the accomplishments that fitted them for the marriage market, the French and the music and the drawing and the dancing, and then brought out into society to be married as well and as high as could be managed. For a good marriage was the chief avenue by which a household climbed, and a daughter wed into an older or a grander family carried the whole Ashworth name upward with her. This was the long game, played across decades, the patient laundering of origins through schools and marriages and the simple passage of time, until the trade that built the money should fade into a discreetly forgotten past and they should stand, 2 or 3 generations on, as landed gentry whose money had always, as far as anyone troubled to recall, simply been there. The mansion was built to house that transformation, to be the seat from which the climb was made and the stage on which the arrived family would perform its arrival. And the children raised within it were both its inheritors and its purpose, the raw weaver's blood being refined, generation by generation, into the gold of gentility. The master of the house had his own daily round beyond the chambers we have walked, for a man of his position was not idle, whatever the leisured surface suggested, and his days were filled with the business and the duties of his station. There was the estate to be managed, a considerable concern in itself, the farms and their rents, the woods and the game, the cottages and their repair, the agent to be consulted and the accounts to be gone over, for land was not merely an ornament, but a working asset that demanded attention. There were the distant mills, the original source of it all, still turning out their wealth in Lancashire, and still, however they preferred not to dwell on it, requiring the master's oversight, the correspondence and the decisions on which the whole edifice ultimately rested. There was public life, the role of the gentleman in his county, the seat on the magistrate's bench dispensing justice to poachers and petty thieves, the involvement in the affairs of the county, perhaps in time the ambition of a seat in Parliament, the public offices by which a man of substance took his place among the rulers of his world. And there was the club in town, the masculine refuge in the capital where the gentlemen repaired during the season, and the shooting and the hunting that were half pleasure and half the serious social business of the landed life. The leisure of the country house was never mere idleness for the master. It was the setting for a life of management and duty and quiet power, the running of an estate and a fortune and a place in the public order, conducted with the unhurried air of a man who need never seem to work, but conducted none the less behind the leisured manner with the same shrewd attention that had built the mills in the first place. For all its air of permanence, the world we have walked through tonight was already, even in its heyday, carrying the seeds of its own ending, and a watchful observer in the year of our visit might have caught the first faint signs of the change that would, within 2 generations, sweep nearly all of it away. The technologies that would undo the old arrangement were already stirring. Electricity was coming, and the electric light, when it spread, would abolish at a stroke the whole filthy daily labour of lamps and candles, the lamp-room and its paraffin-stained servant made obsolete by the turning of a switch. New machines were being dreamed of that would one day take over the heaviest of the household tasks, the washing and the cleaning that consumed so many lives. The motor car was a few years off, and with it the end of the stable and the coachman, and the whole horse-drawn world of the mews. And deeper changes than the mechanical were gathering, changes in what people would accept and expect for the supply of young men and women willing to spend their lives in service, to rise at 5 and turn their faces to the wall and live by the pull of another's bell, depended on a settled order and a lack of alternatives that would not last. As other work opened up, in the shops and the factories and the offices of a growing economy, work with fixed hours and freedom in the evenings, and no requirement to be invisible, the old service would lose its hold, and the children of the servant class would begin to choose otherwise. None of this was visible yet, in the blazing confident year of 1875, with the mansion new and the fortune secure, and the servants at their posts, and the whole arrangement seeming as fixed as the hills. But it was coming, and the beautiful, elaborate machine of the great house, so newly built and so sure of itself, had perhaps a bare half-century of its full life left to run. Now the evening we came for has run its course, and it is very late, and it falls to the butler to perform the last office of the day, the locking up, the slow, solemn circuit by which the mansion is closed and secured for the night. When the family has finally gone up, when the last guest's candle has wavered away up the grand stair, and the drawing-room stands empty with its fire sinking to embers, the butler makes his round. He goes through the ground floor by candlelight, and he checks each window and bars each shutter, and he tries each outer door and turns the heavy keys, and he sees that the fires are safely banked behind their guards, and he carries the day's silver back to the safety of the strong-room and locks the iron door upon it, and he extinguishes the lamps one by one, so that the rooms fall dark behind him as he passes. It is a quiet and a faintly ceremonial progress, this nightly securing of the sleeping mansion, the master of the male staff walking the silent corridors alone with his candle and his keys, the guardian of the establishment through the dark hours, and when he has made his circuit and satisfied himself that all is fast and safe, he too at last climbs to his bed beside the plate he guards. The two worlds go to their rest at their two different hours, the family long since warm in their curtained beds, while the work of clearing went on below, the upper servants following, the lowest maids the last of all to finish, and the first to rise, so that the household never wholly sleeps, but only thins through the small hours, to the banked fires and the ticking clocks, and the one maid who will wake first in the dark before the line of the two worlds, blurred for these few sleeping hours, is drawn sharp again with the morning. And so we come back at the very end to where we began, to that plain door covered in green cloth and studded with brass nails, set so modestly into the panelling beneath the grand stair, and we can see it now for what it is. It looked, when we first passed it, like nothing at all, a servant's door beneath notice, easy to walk by without a glance, which is exactly what it was built to be. But we have been through it now, again and again, all evening, back and forth between the two mansions that share the one roof, and we know what it divides. On one side, the carved oak and the silk and the silver, the warmth and the leisure and the light, the dozen beautiful chambers in which a family lived a life of studied ease. On the other, the bare boards and the whitewash and the cold stone stairs, the kitchens and the sculleries and the attics, the bells and the back stairs, the small population of human beings who rose in the dark, and laboured in the cold and turned their faces to the wall, and who made, with their unceasing and invisible work, every particle of the ease enjoyed on the other side. That green cloth door, deadening the sound, hiding the labour, keeping the two worlds apart so that the one need never witness the other, is the truest emblem of the entire arrangement. The line between the served and the serving made into a thing you could push open with your hand, and the deepest fact about it is the one it was designed to hide, the plain fact that the beauty was made by the labour, that there was no magic in it, that the warmth and the silver and the flowers and the serene candle-lit dinners all came, every one of them, from the hands of people the household had arranged never to see, on the far side of a door that was built, with great care and at considerable expense, precisely so that it should not be looked at. The life of the mansion turned with the year, and each season laid its own demands on the people who kept it, so that the hidden labour had its calendar as the land did. Spring brought the great upheaval of the spring cleaning, the annual deep purge when the whole place was turned out from top to bottom, the carpets lifted and beaten in the open air, the curtains taken down and shaken free of a winter's soot, the walls and ceilings wiped, the furniture dragged out and the floors scoured beneath it, weeks of heavy extra toil piled on top of the ordinary round, so that the dwelling might be cleansed of the grime that the long dark months of fires and lamps had laid upon everything. Summer, with the family often away in town, brought the quieter skeleton months, the shrouded chambers, the slower pace, and the long days of light that spared at least the labour of the lamps. Autumn brought the shooting, and with it the house parties, the influx of guests and their staff, the kitchen at full stretch for weeks, the game hanging in the larder, the busiest and most sociable season of the country year. And winter brought the cold, the real adversary, the season when the warming of the place became a daily battle, the fires devouring coal, the housemaids carrying scuttle after scuttle, the pipes freezing, the early dark drawing on the labour of the lamps by 4 in the afternoon, the servants rising and working in a cold that the family wrapped in their warmed and curtained chambers never truly felt. Round the calendar went, season into season, each with its weight of work, and the hidden staff turned with it like the hands of a clock, their lives keeping time to the seasons of a place that was not their own, marking the years not by their own milestones but by the spring cleanings and the shooting parties and the long cold winters of the family they served. Among the domestics there was sometimes one who stood apart from the constant coming and going, the old retainer, the domestic who had given not a few years but an entire working lifetime to a single household, and such a figure was honoured, in the better households, almost as a member of the family itself. Picture an old butler who had entered the household as a boy, as a hall boy or a junior footman, in the time of the present master's father, and had risen slowly through the ranks across 4 decades and more, until he stood at the head of the male staff, grey and dignified and indispensable, the keeper of the household's memory as much as of its plate. Such a man had seen the children born and christened and grown and married. He had stood through the funerals and the weddings. He knew the family's history and its secrets, and its silver better than the family did itself, and he carried it all with a discretion as deep as the strong room. The loyalty could run very deep, on both sides, the old servant devoted to the Ashworths he had served so long, the family relying on and genuinely fond of the faithful retainer who had been a fixture of their lives since childhood. And when at last he grew too old to serve, such a man might be rewarded as the system at its most humane knew how to reward, pensioned into a cottage on the estate, his long fidelity honoured, allowed to end his days in security, and a measure of respect, the rare and fortunate opposite of the worn-out maid turned off to the workhouse. He was the human face of the whole arrangement at its kindest, the proof that the bond between served and serving could be, sometimes, a real and a tender thing, and not merely the cash transaction it was at bottom, a lifetime given and a lifetime, in the end, decently acknowledged. If you had stood in the service passage and simply listened, you would have heard the mansion speak, for the 2 worlds that the eye was so carefully prevented from seeing across were joined, all day long, by sound, and the chief voice of the place was the voice of the bells. They were ringing all the time, the bells, the whole jangling chorus of them on their coiled springs, and to the trained ear of the staff they were a language, telling not only which chamber had called, but by the manner of the ringing, the mood and the urgency of the person who had pulled the cord, the impatient repeated jerk of a master kept waiting, the steady summons of the mistress, the particular bell that everyone dreaded and everyone ran to answer. Beneath the bells ran all the other sounds of the labouring establishment, the tramp of feet on the stone of the back stairs, the clash and clatter of the scullery, the rumble of the dumb waiter in its shaft, the hiss of the gas, the roar of the kitchen range, the voices calling down the speaking tubes, the whole busy soundscape of the working mansion that was kept by the green baize doors and the thick walls from ever reaching the hushed and carpeted calm on the other side. The family lived in near silence, a silence that was itself a luxury, the deep quiet of spaces where nothing was ever heard, but the fall of the fire, and the tick of the clock, and the soft tread of a servant who had been trained to move without a sound. and the servants lived in noise, the constant clamour of the work, the bells above all, calling and calling, the sound of the family's wants made audible, so that if the mansion had a voice, it was the voice of those bells, ringing down from the silent rooms above into the busy passages below, the sound of one world summoning another that it had arranged never to have to see. It is worth pausing to consider that none of this separation happened by accident, for the two mansions in one that we have explored was a thing deliberately designed, drawn on paper by an architect working to a brief, and the principles of that design were set out quite openly in the manuals of house planning that the age produced for the guidance of the rich man building his seat. The governing rule, stated again and again by the writers on the subject, was the complete separation of the family from the staff, and the architect earned his fee in large part by his ingenuity in achieving it. He laid out the plan so that the offices, as the working parts were called, formed almost a separate building, often grouped around their own service court, joined to the main block but turned away from it, with their own entrance, and their own yard, and their own world. He contrived the two systems of circulation, the families and the servants, so that they crossed as little as possible, threading the back stairs and the service passages through the plan like a hidden circulatory system that touched every room and was seen in none. He placed the noisome and the noisy offices, the kitchen with its smells and the scullery with its clatter, where their sounds and their odours could not reach the dining room, and yet near enough that the food need not travel too far or grow cold on the way, a puzzle of competing demands that taxed his skill, and he attended to the smallest details of concealment, the placing of a window, so that a servant at work could not be seen from the lawn, the turning of a passage so that two worlds should not meet, the disguising of a door. The result was not a building that happened to keep its servants out of sight, but a machine expressly engineered to do so. The separation of the classes worked out in plan and section and elevation with the same care that a later age would lavish on the workings of an engine, so that the finished house stood as the precise architectural embodiment of a social idea, the idea made buildable and then built, to feel the whole arrangement working at once, follow a single dinner on its journey from the depths to the table. For in that one passage the entire hidden machine reveals itself in motion. It begins days before, in the cold larders and the cellars and the kitchen garden, with the gathering of the materials, the meat from the game larder and the butcher, the vegetables from the walled garden, the fish sent up from the coast, the wine chosen and brought up from the bins. On the day, in the heat of the kitchen, the long labour of cooking proceeds through the afternoon, the cook and her maids bringing a dozen dishes toward their separate readinesses, timed against the hour the family will sit. As the moment comes, the food is dished and garnished and set onto the platform of the dumb waiter, and hauled up the dark shaft through the body of the building to the floor above, where a footman waits at the hatch to receive it, and bears it the last few feet through a concealed door into the dining room, appearing as if from nowhere at the side of a diner who has given no thought to the journey just completed. Course follows course in the same way, each summoned by the butler's signal, each travelling the same hidden route, up out of the roaring kitchen into the candlelit calm, while below, the moment a course is finished, the soiled plates and the spent dishes begin the reverse journey down to the scullery where the maid is already at her sink, so that even as the family lingers over one course, the washing up of the last is already steaming below their feet. The whole thing is a single continuous motion, a circulation of food upward and dirt downward through the secret arteries of the building, sustained for the 2 or 3 hours of the meal at a pitch of coordinated effort that would not disgrace an army, and contrived from beginning to end to present itself on the surface where the family sits, as nothing more strenuous than a sequence of dishes arriving, somehow, exactly when they are wanted. And let us give a closer look, before we leave them, to the 3 figures who ruled the hidden establishment, for the upper domestics were people of real substance and real power, and they deserved to be seen as more than their titles. The butler, grave and self-possessed, was the very picture of dignity, a man who had spent decades learning the bearing and the discretion of his office, who could carry the responsibility of a fortune in silver and the secrets of a household with equal steadiness, and who ruled the male staff with an authority that brooked no question. In his black coat he could be mistaken by the careless eye for a gentleman, and that resemblance was the source of a certain quiet comedy and a certain quiet tension below stairs. For the butler had absorbed the manners of the world he served so thoroughly that he had become, in his own sphere, as much a stickler for form as any duchess. The housekeeper was his female counterpart, and often his rival, a woman of cool competence and considerable pride, her keys at her waist, the badge of an authority that ran over every female domestic and every locked store, a manager of genuine ability who could have run a business had the world allowed her one, and who ran, in fact, an operation as complex as many a business, with a firmness that the younger maids feared and the wise mistress relied upon. And the cook, in the steaming kingdom of her kitchen, wielded a power of a different and more volatile kind, the power of skill and of temperament, an artist in her way and as touchy as artists are, capable of sending up a dinner that would make the family's reputation, and equally capable, if crossed or unappreciated, of making the entire establishment feel the heat of her displeasure. These three, the butler and the housekeeper and the cook, were the officers who stood between the mistress and the labouring ranks, the ones through whom the household was actually governed, and they held, within the strict limits of their station, a real authority and a real dignity. Lives of consequence lived entirely on the hidden side of the green door, never to be witnessed by the world above that depended on them so completely and regarded them so little. There is one space in the family's world grander even than the dining room, used only on the greatest occasions, and that is the ballroom, and on the night of a ball, the whole mansion is transformed into something close to enchantment, at a cost of effort below stairs, that beggars even the labour of an ordinary dinner. The ballroom is a long, high, splendid chamber, kept empty and shrouded for most of the year, its floor a sprung expanse of polished wood, its walls hung with mirrors that will multiply the candlelight 100-fold, its ceiling rising to chandeliers that on the night will blaze with massed flame. For weeks beforehand the preparation builds, the invitations sent and answered, the supper planned on a scale to feed 200, the extra hands hired, the flowers ordered by the cartload. On the day the transformation is wrought, the floor chalked and polished to a perilous gloss, the hundreds of candles set and waiting, the musicians arriving and tuning in their gallery, the supper space laid with a cold feast of astonishing abundance, the whole place dressed with greenery and flowers until it becomes a bower. And when the night comes and the carriages begin to arrive in a long line up the lamplit drive, the mansion blazes from every window, the ballroom fills with silk and jewels and uniforms, the music strikes up, and the guests dance beneath the glittering chandeliers in a scene of beauty that is the very summit of everything the household has striven for, the moment when its arrival is enacted and witnessed and confirmed before the whole county. And all of it, every candle that blazes and each glass of champagne that is drunk and every ice that is handed round, rests on the labour of a hidden staff, swollen for the night to twice its size, toiling unseen through the small hours, so that the dancers may waltz until dawn in a fairyland conjured entirely by the work of people none of them will ever see, who will still be clearing the wreckage and scrubbing the floors long after the last carriage has rolled away into the grey morning. Let us look, too, at the children's own day, for the upper floor where they lived was a little world with a rhythm all its own, neither the families nor the servants, but something between. The children woke in the nursery to the care of the nurse and the nursery maid, and the day was a structured round of meals and lessons and airings quite separate from their parents' lives. They breakfasted in the nursery, not with their mother and father, on plainer fare than the dining room saw, bread and milk and porridge. The nursery kept deliberately simple and wholesome by the convictions of the age about the rearing of the young. The mornings were for lessons, the younger children with the nurse, and the older with the governess in the schoolroom, the girls at their reading and their needlework and their scales, the small boys too, until the age came for them to be sent away to school. There was the daily airing, the walk in the grounds, or the outing in the pony cart, the children marshalled by the nurse through the gardens where they might be seen but not heard. There was the nursery tea, and then, the great event of their day, the cleaned and brushed descent to the drawing-room for the hour with their parents, when they were displayed and admired and questioned, and then, as the dressing-bell sounded, taken up again to bed. It was a childhood of comfort and of strange distance, warm in its way, ordered and secure, and yet lived at one remove from the parents who had made them, raised by the hands of servants in a wing of their own home, learning, before they could put words to it, the lesson that love and care were things that could be delegated, that came from paid attendance, that flowed not from the mother in the drawing-room but from the nurse in the nursery, who was herself a servant, and who might, when the children were grown and needed her no longer, be let go like any other. Consider even so small a thing as the arrival of a single afternoon caller, for in it the whole trained machine performs in miniature. A carriage turns in at the drive, and before it has well stopped, a footman has seen it from a window and is at the door, opening it as the visitor mounts the steps, so that no guest of this house is ever left to knock and wait. The card is presented and taken, borne on a salver to the mistress to learn whether she is at home, that useful fiction by which a lady might be genuinely out, or in but not receiving, or in and receiving, as she chose. If the answer is yes, the visitor is shown up, conducted through the hall and into the drawing-room by a servant who announces the name and withdraws, and within moments, unbidden, the tea-things appear, summoned by some invisible signal, carried in and set out and poured, the whole small ceremony of hospitality unfolding, as though the house had anticipated this exact guest at this exact hour. And when the visit reaches its proper brief length and the caller rises to go, the same machine runs in reverse, the servant appearing to show them down, the footman at the door, the carriage called round from where it has waited, so that the guest passes out as smoothly as they came in, carried through the whole visit on a current of attention they need never once acknowledge, attended at every step by people whose entire art lay in being exactly where they were needed at the moment they were needed, and nowhere to be seen the rest of the time. A word finally about money, for the wages that bound this whole population to its labour were small, and the way they were paid reveals much. A domestic was hired by the year, and the wage was reckoned by the year, and it was modest even for the highest and very meagre for the lowest, the butler and the cook commanding sums that a clerk might respect, the scullery maid earning a few pounds in a 12-month, all of them receiving in addition their keep, their board and lodging, and often their working clothes, which was reckoned a considerable part of the bargain, and was indeed the real attraction, the certainty of a roof and a full plate in an uncertain world. Around the bare wage clustered the perquisites, the customary extras that were as jealously guarded as any wage, the cast-off clothes of the family, the candle ends, and the used tea leaves that were the housekeeper's by right to sell, the dripping that belonged to the cook, the tips called veils, that departing guests were expected to press into the hands of the servants who had attended them, a custom so entrenched that a mean guest who failed at it might find the next visit strangely uncomfortable. When the family was away, the servants left behind might be given board wages, a small sum in lieu of the food no longer cooked for them, on which they fed themselves. It was, all told, a meagre economy, a life lived on little cash and much custom, and the great gulf between the few pounds a maid earned in a year and the thousands the family spent on a single ball is, in the end, the plainest possible statement of what the entire arrangement was and how it worked, a vast comfort for a few, purchased with the cheap and the unregarded labour of the many. Even the clothes the servants wore were a uniform of their station, for dress below stairs was as legible a marker of rank as anything in the drawing-room above. The housemaid wore, in the dirty work of the morning, a print dress of cotton, washable and plain, with a coarse apron over it for the rough tasks, her hair pinned up under a simple cap, and then, transformed for the afternoon when her heavy work was done and she might be glimpsed by the family, she changed into a dress of black, with a clean white apron and a smarter cap and cuffs, the costume by which the parlour-maid and the housemaid were known, neat and modest and self-effacing. The cap was the very badge of service, the thing that marked a woman as a servant at a glance, and to be put into a cap was to take up the station and all its meanings. The upper female attendants, the housekeeper and the lady's maid, dressed a degree finer, and were spared the cap or wore a finer one, their clothing reflecting their nearer approach to gentility, the housekeeper in her rustling black, like a sombre lady of business. The men were graded the same way, the lower in their working clothes, the footman splendid in the family's livery, the butler alone in the plain black coat that set him almost apart from service altogether. And all of it, the print and the black and the apron and the cap and the braided livery, was a language spoken without words, telling anyone who could read it exactly where its wearer stood in the great descending order of the house, so that even stripped of every other clue you could have placed each person in the hierarchy by their dress alone, the whole society of the place written, as the family standing was written in silver and stone, in the plain cloth and the white caps of the people who served. Think, too, of how little of the mansion a servant could call their own, for in all that vast pile of brick and stone crammed with the possessions of the family, the servant possessed almost nothing and nowhere. The whole of a maid's private property might fit in a single tin trunk or wooden box kept at the foot of her shared bed, holding her few changes of clothes, her Sunday best, a work-box, a Bible or a prayer book, a handful of letters from home, perhaps a treasured photograph or a keepsake from a sweetheart, and that box, with its little lock, was the one scrap of privacy and ownership she had in the world. She slept in a bed she did not own, in a chamber she shared, in a house where every other room was forbidden to her except to clean it. She ate food provided, wore clothes half provided, and owned. Of all the splendour she spent her days maintaining, not one cup or candlestick or square of carpet. The contrast could not be sharper. The family surrounded by more possessions than they could use or even remember owning, the servant's entire estate fitting in a box she could carry under one arm, and when she left a place, that box was what she packed and carried out to the carrier's cart, the sum of her belongings going with her to the next residence and the next attic, an entire working life lived among other people's things, owning scarcely anything but the little she could lock away in the dark at the foot of a borrowed bed. And now, before we let the mansion sink at last into its sleep and ourselves with it, let us do the one thing the people of that confident year could not, and look forward down the half-century and more that lay ahead of them, to see what became of this whole vast and elaborate world, for its ending is part of its story, and there is a strange consolation in it for us, lying here so long after. The world we have walked through tonight, so newly built and so sure of its permanence, was in truth near the high noon of a day that was already, imperceptibly, beginning to decline, and within the span of a single long lifetime, almost the whole of it would be gone. The great country houses, raised in their thousands across the centuries and crowned by the confident new palaces of the cotton and the railway and the banking fortunes, would within 2 generations face a reckoning that few in 1875 could have imagined, and this elaborate life of service that filled them. The butlers and the housekeepers and the footmen and the scullery maids, the entire hidden population on whose labour it all depended, would melt away almost entirely, until the way of life we have spent this evening inside became as remote and as vanished as any age of the deep past. The first blows fell on the money. The long agricultural depression that began in the 1870s, the very decade of our visit, sent the rents and the land values that underpinned the old estates into a slow decline, from which they never fully recovered, so that the income that sustained the great houses began, quietly, to fail. Then came the taxes, the death duties first levied in the 1890s and raised, decade by decade, ever higher, until the passing of a great estate from one generation to the next could cost a crippling share of its complete value, and families that had counted on the land, descending undiminished forever, found themselves selling land, selling pictures, selling the very houses, to meet the demands of the state. The economic ground on which the whole edifice stood was shifting, slowly at first, and then with gathering speed, and the cost of keeping up a vast establishment, the wages of a small army of servants, the endless upkeep of a vast and elaborate building, was becoming, for one Ashworth's after another, simply impossible to bear. And then came the wars, and the wars broke the old world for good. The first of the great wars of the new century took the young men away. The footmen and the grooms and the gardeners and the hall boys marched off from the servants' halls of 1,000 grand houses to the trenches, and a terrible number of them never came back. A generation of the serving class cut down alongside the sons of the families they had served. The houses themselves were turned to other uses for the duration, given over to be hospitals and barracks and offices, their state apartments filled with iron beds, their lawns dug up, the old life suspended and, as it turned out, never fully resumed. And those of the servants who survived, who had seen another world beyond the green door, who had worked in the factories or served in the forces or nursed in the hospitals, who had tasted wages and hours and a freedom the old service never offered, did not, in their numbers, go back. Why should a young woman return to rise at 5 and carry coal and turn her face to the wall when the factory and the shop and the office now stood open, with their fixed hours and their evenings free and their wage paid into her own hand? The supply of willing hands on which the whole arrangement had silently depended was drying up, and a house cannot run on invisible labour when the labour will no longer come. After the First War there was a brief uneasy revival, a last golden afterglow in which some of the grand mansions blazed up once more into something like their old glory, but it was the light of an autumn afternoon, and everyone who looked clearly could see the dark coming on. The domestics grew fewer and harder to find and more expensive to keep. The families economized, closing rooms, letting servants go, making do. The elaborate full establishment of 24 indoor servants gave way to a handful, and then to a daily woman, and then to none. And the second of those wars finished what the first had begun. Again the houses were requisitioned, filled with troops or evacuees or school children, hard used and neglected through the long years of the war. And when peace came at last there was no money to restore them, and no staff to run them, and no longer, in the changed world that followed, any clear reason for them to exist at all. The age of the country house was simply over. What followed was a destruction on a scale that is hard now to credit, for in the middle decades of the new century, the great houses of England were pulled down by the hundred, unwanted, unaffordable, impossible to staff, ruinous to maintain, taxed beyond bearing, hundreds upon hundreds of them, the proud creations of centuries and the confident palaces of the industrial rich alike, were stripped of their contents, sold for the value of their materials, and demolished. The libraries dispersed, the panelling torn out and shipped abroad, the great chambers that had echoed with the rituals of dinner reduced to rubble and carted away, the parks sold for building land, the whole astonishing fabric of a vanished way of life swept from the face of the country in a single generation, often with scarcely a protest, as so much useless lumber from a dead age. A house like the one we have walked through tonight, raised at such cost and with such confidence in 1875, stood a real chance by the 1950s of being a pile of brick rubble and a stretch of bare ground where the gardens once had been, its very name forgotten, its hidden world of stairs and passages and bells reduced to a memory held by a dwindling few who had once, long ago, been young in service there. For the people, the servants, the ending was gentler than the demolition of the houses, but it was an ending too, the quiet extinction of a whole way of working life. The last of the great households shed their staff, the last butlers and housekeepers grew old and died. The skills that a lifetime in service had honed, the laying of a great table, the keeping of silver, the running of a complicated establishment, became skills that nobody needed any more. And the children and the grandchildren of the serving class who had refused to go back below stairs made their lives instead in the open world their parents had never been allowed, in homes of their own, however modest, where no bell summoned them, and no door was built to hide them, where they rose for their own purposes, and turned their faces to no wall. It was, for all that was lost, a liberation, the closing of an order built on the keeping of human beings in their places, and if something of beauty went with it, the craftsmanship and the order and the strange completeness of that vanished life, what went with it also was a vast sum of human labour and self-effacement that no one now would wish to ask of anyone again. So when you stand today in one of the great houses that did survive, the fortunate few preserved and open to the visitor, and you walk through the beautiful rooms, and then, if you are allowed, through the green baize door into the bare passages and the cold kitchens and the narrow stairs behind, you are walking through the ruins of a world as wholly gone as Rome, a world that ended not in some distant age, but within the memory of the oldest people now alive. The bells hang silent on their wall, the range is cold, the attics where the maids slept are empty, and the whole vast machine of hidden labour that we have watched tonight running at full stretch, the carrying and the cleaning and the answering of bells, the lives spent rising in the dark and climbing the back stairs and keeping the two worlds apart, has fallen still forever, and left behind only these mute passages and this quiet dwelling, and the green door standing open at last with no one left to keep on either side of it. There is no sadness in this, lying here in the dark so long after it has all gone by, only the particular peace that comes from standing at the far end of a story and seeing it whole. The people we have walked among tonight, the master in his study and the mistress in her morning room, the cook at her range and the butler with his keys, the housemaid on the back stair with her heavy cans, and the scullery maid at her stone sink in the cold, all of them lived their lives and carried their burdens and went at last to their rest. Long ago now, every one of them, the served and the serving alike, laid down together under the same quiet ground. The strivings that filled their days, the family's long campaign for standing, the servant's weary climb up the ladder of rank, the whole anxious business of who must call on whom and who must turn their face to the wall, has come to its end and been forgiven by time, as all our strivings will be, and there is a deep and a settling comfort in that, in the knowledge that the world goes on turning, and the houses rise and fall, and the people pass through them and are gathered in, and that the small urgent matters that fill our own days will one day be as far off and as gently regarded as the ringing of those bells. You have nothing to strive for in this hour. The work of your own day, whatever it was, is behind you now, as their work is behind them, and you may set it down as completely as they have set theirs down, and let the long story carry you, as a slow river carries a leaf toward the sleep that is waiting. So let the mansion build itself once more around you in the dark, for the last time tonight, not the working mansion now with all its labour, but the mansion at peace, the mansion asleep, holding the two worlds gently in its walls through the small hours of the night. Let the fires sink to their soft red embers behind the guards, glowing low in grate after grate through the silent spaces. Let the candles be out, and the lamps trimmed and lightless, and the only light the faint blue glow of the moon through a gap in the curtains, lying in pale bars across the carpets. No one is walking on now. Let the great rooms stand empty and still, the drawing room with its silk and its porcelain dreaming in the dark, the dining room with its long table cleared and bare, the library with its 1,000 books all closed and silent on their shelves. Let the hidden passages be unlit and quiet too, the back stairs empty, the kitchen banked and cooling, the bells hanging motionless on their wall at last, the day's ringing done. And high under the slates, let the maids be asleep in their narrow beds, the hard day behind them, and a few hours of their own at last, their tired bodies resting, their faces in the gloom turned toward no wall, but toward whatever it is that the weary dream of, a home, a sweetheart, a morning with no bell in it. The entire mansion sleeps, the warm middle floors and the cold high ones, the served and the serving, all of them resting now under the one roof, breathing slow in the gloom, while the clocks tick the quiet hours away, and the moon moves across the windows and the night deepens toward its stillest hour. Let us walk it through one final time, very slowly now, with no purpose but to say good night to each part of it and let it settle into rest. Down the long drive first, where the gravel gleams faintly under the moon, and the new-planted trees stand black and still against the sky, and the mansion floats above its terraces, dark now in almost every window, only here and there the last dim glow of a dying fire. In at the front door, into the hall, where the great staircase climbs away into shadow, and the suits of armour stand sentinel in the dark, and the embers of that useless ceremonial fire fade slowly in the cavernous grate. Past the drawing-room, where the moon finds the gilt of a picture frame, and the pale curve of a porcelain figure, and the heavy fall of the silk curtains, all of it at rest, the chairs that were never quite for sitting in, waiting empty in the gloom. Past the dining-room, the long table bare and gleaming faintly, the chairs pushed in, the silver locked away below, there, still holding the faintest ghost of the candles and the flowers of the evening. Past the library, where the books sleep in their thousands behind the glass, and the deep chairs hold the shapes of the men who sat in them, and the clock on the mantel ticks alone in the stillness, and then through the green door, softly, into the other mansion, the one that is resting now from its labour, along the stone passage where the bells hang silent on their wall, every one of them still, the long jangling day all rung out. Into the kitchen where the great range is banked for the night, its iron cooling, a single low glow at its heart, the copper pans gleaming dully on their hooks, the broad table scrubbed and bare, and waiting for the morning's work that has not yet come. Past the scullery with its stone sink empty at last, and its mountains of crockery washed and put away. Past the cold larders with their slate shelves and their hanging stores. Past the butler's pantry where the man himself sleeps now beside the locked plate. Up the narrow back stair, the steep dark twist of it, worn in the centre of every tread, climbing past the family's resting floors, up and up to the very top, under the slates, where the maids lie sleeping in their plain cold chambers, 2 and 3 together, the candle out, the thin blankets drawn close against the chill, their work-roughened hands at rest on the coverlet, their young faces smoothed in sleep. Let them sleep. They rose before you, and they will rise before you again, and for these few hours the bells are silent, and no one calls them, and the day's long climb is over, and they are, for this little while, as free as anyone under that roof, free in their dreams, in the dark, at the top of the sleeping mansion. The whole of it rests now, every part of it that we have walked through together, the grand and the humble, the seen and the hidden, all of it gathered into the one great stillness of the night. And the two worlds that spent the whole long day so carefully kept apart are not apart now, not really. For sleep is the one country that takes no account of rank, and the master in his curtained bed, and the scullery maid under the slates have crossed, both of them, into the same darkness, breathing the same slow breath, given over to the same unknowing rest. The green door stands ajar in the empty passage, and no one passes through it, and it does not matter now which side of it anyone belongs to. The mansion holds them all, the way the night holds us all, gently without distinction, while the stars wheel slowly over the dark roof and the hours go by, and nothing stirs but the settling of the old timbers and the far-off cry of an owl across the sleeping park. And you, lying there in your own apartment, in your own time, so far from that vanished mansion, and yet for these few hours so deeply inside it, you may let it all go now, the same way the sleeping house has let its long day go. There is nothing left tonight that needs your watching. The fires are banked, the doors are barred, the silver is locked away, the bells are still, and the last domestic has climbed at last to her rest, and the whole great structure of effort and care that filled the day has been set down, completely, until the morning. You may set yours down too. Whatever you carried into this hour, whatever small unfinished things turned over in your mind as you lay down, you may let them settle now into the same forgiving dark that has taken in the strivings of all those long-gone lives, the master's ambition and the maid's weariness, and the whole anxious business of a world that thought it would last forever and did not. None of it needs you tonight. The house will keep itself. The night will keep you. And there is a great kindness in that, in being, for these few hours, no one who is needed, no one who is called for, no bell ringing, anywhere in the dark for you, only yourself, resting as the house rests, as the sleeping maids lie quiet under their cold slates, as everything that has ever worked too hard for too long is allowed, at the last, to rest. Let your breath go slow and deep now, the way the breath of a whole sleeping house goes slow in the small hours. Feel the weight of your own body settling into the bed beneath you, heavy and warm and cared for, the day's small aches loosening one by one, the shoulders letting down, the hands unclenching, the face going soft and still. There is nowhere you have to be. There is nothing you have to do. The long story has been told, and the house is asleep, and the night has folded itself around you like a thick curtain drawn against the cold, and on the far side of it the world can wait until morning. Let your thoughts grow slower and farther apart, the way footsteps grow fainter going away down a passage, until the silence between them lengthens and lengthens, and there is only the silence and the warmth and the slow tide of your own quiet breathing carrying you out gently into the dark. Before you go, and very softly, only this. If these long evenings inside other times and other lives are something you would like to find your way back to, you are always welcome to subscribe, and another of them will be here, waiting, whenever you have need of it, with no hurry and nothing owed. It is a quiet pleasure to me to know that you spend these hours here, and that the few hours we have spent together tonight, walking through that great sleeping establishment and all its hidden apartments, have brought you gently to the edge of rest. That is all I ever hope for. Nothing more is asked of you now. So let the mansion fade the way a dream fades, its dark walls dissolving softly back into the night they were built from. Let the long drive go, and the lamplit windows, and the green door in the panelling, and the silent bells, and the maids asleep under the slates. Let it all grow dim and far and gentle, until there is no house and no century and no sound at all, only the warmth of your own bed, and the slow rhythm of your own breath, and the wide, soft, dark closing over you like deep water. You are safe. You are warm. The day is done, and well done. And behind you now, there is nothing left but to drift, and to sink, and to sleep. Sleep well. Stay warm. Be kind to the people in your house, and I will see you in the next one. Good night.